The first thing the river city of Vaskandel learned to fear was not fire, nor flood, nor even famine. It was silence. In the markets along the canal, merchants kept their ledgers open where the damp could curl the pages, because a curling page was a small price for a straight memory. In the narrow streets where laundry lines hung between balconies, mothers repeated their children's names as they pinned shirts to rope, soft, constant murmurs, as if the names might drift away if left unattended. By the docks, sailors tapped the backs of their hands against their own knuckles, counting the beats between strikes, anchoring themselves in rhythm while the tide sighed in and out like a patient animal. All of it was habit shaped by an old truth: the city's hours did not flow on their own. They were made. Above the rooftops, the Aurelian Spire rose like a needle of brass and stone, its clock faces glinting in sun or rain, its bell chamber a dark crown. The tower was older than most families, older than the current river wall, older than the paved streets that pretended Vaskandel had always been orderly. In its belly, the anchor engine churned gears with teeth as tall as a person, counterweights that descended in slow majesty, chains that sang under tension. The spire was not just a timekeeper. It was a promise the city had been living inside for generations. And promises could crack. Zelka Orris reached the tower before the morning bakeries had set their second trays out to cool. She crossed the bridge over the canal, skirts gathered in one hand to keep the hem from the wet stones, and nodded to the night watchman yawning at his post. He raised 2 fingers in a tired salute and then, as if remembering something important, pressed those same fingers to his temple. "Bells ring yet?" he asked, voice rough from sleep. Zelka lifted her gaze to the clock face. The minute hand crept forward with its usual stubborn dignity. The hour hand held steady on a clean line. "They're ringing," she said. "Don't borrow trouble." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath all night. "I'll try," he said, though they both knew trouble was something Vaskandel loaned out freely. She let herself through the spire's side door, past the plaque with the Regency's faded seal and the older, nearly worn-away city crest beneath it. The inside smelled of oil, dust, and metal warmed by friction. It also smelled, faintly, of something else, like rain on hot stone, like a match just struck. Zelka had learned to trust those scents as much as she trusted sight. The tower spoke in its own language, and the body understood it first. The stairwell spiraled up through the stone. Zelka climbed with the ease of a person who had memorized every uneven step. Her lantern swung in a steady arc, throwing light over pipes and rivets and the occasional chalk mark left by Bastian Krail, the tower's senior clockwright. Bastian's notes were always practical. "Tighten here. Replace this tooth. Don't let apprentices touch that, for the love of all hours." She reached the first access landing and set her palm on the wall. The metal beneath the stone, hidden braces and plates, thrummed against her skin, a living vibration. Zelka closed her eyes and listened with more than ears. "Morning rhythm," she thought. "Keep to it." At the edge of her awareness, the spire's great bells shimmered in echo. Not sound, no, not yet, but the shape of sound, the expectation of it. 12 bells, 12 signatures. The noon bell was brightest even in the dark, the one most people swore they could feel in their bones when it rang. Zelka felt it now like a steady pressure behind the sternum. Not wrong, she decided. Not failing. But strained. She climbed again. At the bell chamber, she unlatched the iron grate and stepped onto the narrow catwalk circling the bells. The chamber was vast and shadowed, latticed with beams. The bells hung in a row like captured moons, each with a collar of etched brass around its waist where the pattern lived. The ropes and hammers were arranged with ceremonial precision, but there was no ceremony here. Only work. Zelka set her satchel down and drew out her tools, a small tuning fork of pale alloy, a strip of charcoal, a rag dampened with oil, and a thin piece of chalk for marking hairline fractures. Not much, for a task that held an entire city's life together. She had once been ashamed of that, how her magic required so little in the way of visible equipment. People did not trust what they could not see. Neither did the Solar Regency. She touched the first bell's collar and pressed the tuning fork to it. The fork rang softly, barely louder than a whisper, but Zelka felt the resonance bloom through the brass. Her teeth tingled. The bell answered true. She moved on. By the third bell, her shoulders had settled. By the 5th, her breathing matched the engine's steady churn. By the 7th, she could almost imagine this was simply a craft like any other. Check, clean, correct. A job that did not ask for pieces of herself. At the 8th bell, the tuning fork's song soured. It was subtle, an almost imperceptible wobble in the harmonic, like a thread pulled slightly out of place. Zelka's fingers tightened on the collar. Her lantern flame flickered without a draft. "There you are," she murmured. The collar's etched pattern, fine, looping script in an old dialect of brass sigil, looked intact. But she knew better than to trust the eye. Time did not break with dramatic cracks and falling shards. It broke the way a tired person broke, by slipping, by losing small things first, by letting the seam loosen until the whole garment came apart. She took the chalk and traced the edge of the sigil. Her mark caught on a microscopic ridge. A fracture, not in the bell itself, but in the collar's pattern, so thin a clockwright might miss it, so small a citizen would never suspect it existed, but enough to make an stutter. Zelka closed her eyes. She steadied her breath. Then she hummed. The sound she made was low, almost inaudible. It did not match any song Vaskandel sang, and it would have been unlovely in a parlor. But the bell collar shivered under her hands. The resonance shifted. The fracture's edge softened as if it were wax near a flame. She could have pushed harder. She could have forced the brass to obey. She didn't. Bell binding was not conquest. It was persuasion. Zelka let the hum grow, thread by thread, until the collar's vibration aligned with the tuning fork's memory of true pitch. She traced the sigil with her fingertip, not the chalk now, and felt the pattern settle back into itself like a tired body finding a comfortable position. Then came the cost. It slid into her mind with no warning, the way it always did. Zelka's throat tightened. For an instant she tasted cinnamon and warm milk. She saw her own hands as a child's, small, chapped from winter air, cupped around a mug while her mother stirred it and told her, softly, that clocks were only frightening if you didn't understand that they needed kindness. The memory flickered. Zelka snatched at it as if she could hold it in place, but bell binding did not bargain. The cinnamon remained. The warmth remained. But the voice, her mother's voice, blurred at the edges, the cadence becoming uncertain. Zelka blinked hard, breathing through the sharp ache behind her eyes. Not that one, she thought fiercely, and then realized the thought itself was pointless. The engine took what it took. It did not care what you loved. Her hands trembled. She pressed them to the cool brass and waited for the shaking to pass. When she lifted her head, the bell collar was whole. The tuning fork rang true. Outside, the city would not know it had been spared a stutter that might have erased a child's afternoon or a lover's promise. Zelka's mother's voice would not return by the simple act of gratitude. She packed away her tools with precise care, as if neatness could keep her from coming apart. The stairwell down was easier on the legs, harder on the heart. Zelka paused at the mid-landing where a narrow window slit looked out over Vaskandel. The river cut through the city like a dark ribbon. Roofs clustered close, chimneys smoking, gulls wheeling in the pale sky. From here, everything looked calm. From here, it was possible to believe the spire was just a tower, and time was just time. A faint knock sounded from below, metal on stone, measured. Zelka's spine straightened. Bastian Krail appeared at the bottom of the stairs, carrying a bundle of tools slung over one shoulder. His hair was iron-grey and always looked like it had been cut with a dull knife, a fact Zelka suspected was on purpose. He looked up at her and grunted. "You're early," he said, as if she'd committed a mild insult. "You're late," Zelka replied. Bastian's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Apprentices slept in," he said. "Had to drag them out by their ears. You feel it." "The 8th collar was off," Zelka said. Bastian swore under his breath. "Again?" "Not by much." Zelka started down. "I mended it." He watched her hands as she passed him, as if looking for a sign of how much she'd paid. Bastian didn't like magic. He didn't like the way it didn't leave sawdust or metal shavings you could sweep into a bucket. But he liked the way the city stayed whole. That was as close to affection as he offered. "Regency's sniffing around," he said. Zelka froze on the stair. "Around the spire?" "Around everything," Bastian said. Saw their seal wagons on Brassway. Heard talk at the guild. Authorization office is jumping like a frog in a frying pan. Zelka's stomach tightened. The Solar Regency had always been present in Vaskandel the way a storm was present on the horizon, distant but watchful. Their officials stamped permits for enchantments, taxed artisans who worked with runelace, and sent inspectors to make sure no one was weaving unauthorized patterns into public infrastructure. The spire counted as infrastructure. Zelka's work counted as a confession. She kept her face blank. They've sniffed before. Aye, Bastian said, but they're sniffing with teeth this time. Zelka continued down, forcing her steps to remain steady. She had learned long ago that panic was another kind of stutter, an internal one that could make the wrong moment repeat itself. At the base of the stairs, she found Junior Thorne in the corridor outside the medic's nook, sorting folded cloths into a satchel. Junior was broad-shouldered, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, hair pinned up in a messy knot. She looked like someone who had never waited to be invited to help. Zell, Junior said, and the single syllable held a warning. You're pale. I'm fine, Zelka lied. Junior narrowed her eyes. Fine like you were last month when the third bell hiccuped and you tried to pretend you didn't lose 3 hours of your childhood. Zelka's mouth tightened. That was an exaggeration. That was you fainting onto my cot. Junior slung the satchel over her shoulder and stepped closer, lowering her voice. The city's been having little slips all week. People coming in saying they can't remember where they put their keys, but it's not keys they're missing. It's threads. Like someone's tugging loose stitches in their minds. Zelka's skin prickled. Little slips, she echoed. Junior nodded. And now the solar lot is moving. I saw a detachment at the river gate. Brass armor, white cloaks. One of them had the sun stitched into his collar with gold thread. Zelka's breath caught. The embroidered sun wasn't just a regency symbol. It marked the solar house itself, royal authority. Not a clerk. Not a mere inspector. Who? Zelka asked, though she already knew she was asking the tower for mercy, and towers did not grant it. Junior shrugged, but her expression was grim. Didn't get a name. Just saw the way people stepped aside for him like they'd forgotten they had spines. Zelka's fingers curled around the strap of her satchel. She wanted to run back up the stairs, into the bell chamber, into the one place she felt useful and certain. The spire made sense. People did not. Eat, Junior ordered, thrusting a small wrapped bundle into Zelka's hands. And if you try to skip it, I'll tell Bastian you're looking wobbly and he'll make you sit. Bastian grunted, neither confirming nor denying his willingness to bully Zelka into self-preservation. Zelka turned away before any softness could show on her face. She unwrapped the bundle as she walked, a piece of bread with sharp cheese pressed inside. The first bite grounded her, the salt and fat pulling her attention back into her body. She made it through the corridor to the spire's administrative room, where the city kept its maintenance logs and the Regency kept its copies of those logs. Zelka opened the ledger and wrote, in careful script, 8th collar corrected, minor harmonic wobble. Paid cost. She paused, then scratched out the last 2 words. No one needed to know the cost. No one with a seal stamp had earned the right to measure what it took for her to keep the city's hours from unraveling. The door opened. It wasn't a casual entry. There was no knock, no hesitant pause. The door swung wide as if the room belonged to whoever stepped through. Zelka looked up. The first thing she saw was light. Not lantern light. Not sun from the window slit. Something else, an impression of brightness carried like a mantle. It made the corridor behind the visitor seem dim by comparison. He was tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that suggested training rather than bulk. His hair was pale, the color of wheat before harvest, cut short and neat. His cloak was white, lined with gold at the edges, and at his collar the sun emblem gleamed with thread so fine it looked like it had been stitched by patient insects. His face was striking in a way that made Zelka's mind reach for easy words: handsome, noble, radiant, and she rejected them all on principle. Instead she took in the details like a clockwork would, the set of his jaw, the measured way he held himself, the calm intensity of his gaze. His eyes were light too, grey touched with gold, like metal catching fire. Behind him stood 2 guards in Regency brass, their expressions careful and blank. The man's gaze swept the room and landed on Zelka as if she were an item on an inventory list. "Zelka Orris," he said. It wasn't a question. Zelka rose slowly from her chair. "Who's asking?" The guards shifted, faintly displeased. Bastian, who had followed Zelka in and lingered near the doorway like an ill-tempered dog, made a sound in his throat. Junior appeared in the corridor behind them, drawn by instinct. The man stepped forward. He held out a document sealed with a sun stamp impressed into red wax. "Prince Odran Merrow," he said. "Emissary of the Solar Regency." The room seemed to tighten around those words. Zelka felt the tower's metal bones hum under her feet, as if it too had noticed the weight of the name. "The Noon Prince," Bastian muttered, half to himself. It wasn't reverence. It was wariness. Odran's expression did not change, but his eyes flicked to Bastian and back to Zelka. "I am here under authority of the Regency's authorization law and the solar mandate for public infrastructure," he said. "The Aurelian Spire is to be brought under direct Regency control. Effective immediately." Zelka stared at the seal, at the wax, at the neat script that would decide the city's fate with a few strokes of ink. Her first instinct was to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd, the idea that someone could walk in with a stamp and claim ownership of the hours. "What does that mean?" she asked, keeping her voice steady by force. "It means," Odran said, "that your continued involvement with the Spire is unauthorized. It will cease." Junior made a sharp sound. Bastian's knuckles whitened around his tool bundle. Zelka's heart beat once, hard, and then settled into a cold rhythm. "The Spire runs because I keep it running," she said. "If the bells stop." "I am aware of the consequences," Odran interrupted, and for the first time Zelka heard a thread of something beneath his control, not impatience, exactly, but urgency. "That is why the Regency must assume oversight. You have been allowed to operate too long without proper review." "Allowed," Zelka repeated. The word tasted like rust. Odran held the document out again, unwavering. "You will sign the transfer of duty and submit to a formal audit of your work. A licensed team will take over maintenance." Zelka took the document but did not break the seal. Her fingers pressed into the paper's edge hard enough to crease it. "And if I don't?" Odran's gaze held hers, steady as a pendulum. "Then you will be removed," he said. "And charged." Charged. Zelka pictured a courtroom with sun sigils carved into every surface, officials deciding how much of her life was permissible. She pictured the bells faltering while forms were filed. "You can't just," Bastian began. "I can," Odran said, still looking at Zelka. "And I will." The worst of it was that he believed he was doing something righteous. Zelka had met men like him before, people who mistook rule-following for virtue and assumed anyone outside their system must be reckless. She forced her grip on the paper to loosen. "You want an audit," she said. "Fine. Audit. But you don't take the Spire away from the city while you do it." "The city is precisely why I am here," Odran replied. "Public infrastructure cannot be entrusted to personal whim." "My whim?" Zelka's voice sharpened despite her intent. "I have lived inside those gears. I have paid for every slip with parts of myself. I have kept your precious public from forgetting their own names." Odran's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in concentration, as if weighing her words. "Emotional claims do not substitute for authorization." Zelka's lips went thin. "And authorization doesn't substitute for compassion." For a heartbeat, something flickered across Odran's face, an almost imperceptible reaction. Not hurt. Not offense. More like recognition. As if she had named something he'd been trying not to see. Then it was gone. "I will inspect the bell chamber," he said. "Now." "You don't know what you're looking for," Zelka said. "I know enough," Odran answered. "And I will have you present. If your work is sound, it will be confirmed." Zelka wanted to refuse. She wanted to refuse with fire. But the spire under her feet hummed again, a subtle warning: strain, strain, strain. The 8th collar had been off. Small slips had been happening all week. And now the Solar Regency had arrived with royal authority. If she stood her ground and was dragged away, who would listen to the bells? Zelka turned toward the stairwell. "Follow," she said curtly. The bell chamber greeted them with cool air and the scent of old brass. Zelka climbed the narrow stairs ahead, lantern in hand. Behind her, she heard the measured footfalls of guards and the quieter, more precise steps of the noon prince. When they reached the catwalk, Odran paused. His gaze lifted to the hanging bells, the etched collars, the hammers waiting like clenched fists. For an instant, the brightness he carried seemed to dim, not physically, but in the way a person's certainty could falter when confronted with something larger than themselves. "It's bigger than the reports," he said quietly. Zelka didn't answer. She watched his face instead, looking for mockery, for dismissal. She found none. He looked like a man standing in a sanctuary he did not fully understand. Odran stepped onto the catwalk, hands clasped behind his back. He studied the nearest bell collar, eyes tracking the sigils with practiced attention. "These markings," he said. "They are not Regency standard." "They're older than your standards," Zelka replied. Odran's mouth tightened, but he did not snap back. Instead, he moved along the catwalk, stopping at each bell in turn. He spoke little. The guards remained a respectful distance, uneasy around the open space and the low, constant thrum of the engine. Zelka was acutely aware of him beside her. Not in the way a flirtatious girl might be aware of a handsome man's proximity, but in the way a person was aware of a sword held near their throat, weight, potential, danger. Yet there was something else too, something that unsettled her more than threat. He was paying attention. When he reached the 8th bell, the one she had mended that morning, he paused longer. His gaze moved over the collar, and Zelka's pulse kicked. "Here," he said, pointing to a section of the sigil. "This line is fresher." Zelka blinked. He wasn't wrong. Where she had softened the fracture and persuaded the brass back into alignment, the metal had smoothed. It did look newer, cleaner, like a scar that hadn't fully weathered. "It was failing," Zelka said. "And you repaired it," Odran said, voice carefully neutral. "Without notifying the authorization office." Zelka's jaw clenched. "If I notified your office every time the tower strained, the city would stutter itself into forgetting before you finished stamping your forms." Odran's eyes lifted to hers. "Procedure exists to prevent exactly the kind of untracked interference that can cause catastrophic destabilization. Procedure exists," Zelka shot back, "to make people like you feel safe while people like me do the work." The air between them tightened. The bells loomed, silent but present. For a moment, Zelka wondered if Odran would order her seized right there, on the catwalk. If the guards would drag her away and leave the tower to strangers with licenses and no listening. Instead, Odran exhaled slowly. "You're angry," he said. Zelka's laugh was sharp. "I'm terrified," she corrected. "And I'm tired." Something shifted in his expression again, an almost invisible softening. "I do not want the bells to fail," he said, as if stating an oath. "That is my purpose here." "And your purpose," Zelka said, "might be the thing that makes them fail." Odran held her gaze a beat longer than necessary. Then he turned away, looking up toward the highest bell, the noon bell, its surface catching the lantern light in a dull glow. "We will test the sequence," he said. "No," Zelka said immediately. Odran looked back. "No. You don't test the sequence for curiosity," Zelka said. "You test when something is wrong enough that you have to. You don't ring bells like you're trying on coats." His mouth flattened. "A controlled sequence check is standard." "This tower isn't standard," Zelka said. Her fingers tightened around the lantern handle. "If you shift the pattern without listening first, you can pull threads you don't know exist." Odran's gaze moved over her face, as if evaluating whether she was exaggerating. "You believe it is that fragile?" "It is," Zelka said. Outside the tower, Vaskandel's morning was brightening. Sunlight leaked through the high slats of the bell chamber, striking dust motes into glitter. Zelka felt the engine's hum deepen. A pressure built behind her eyes, subtle but insistent. "Strain," the spire whispered through vibration. Odran seemed to feel something too, not the same, perhaps, but enough to make him pause. His hand rose, not touching the bell, but hovering near it as if he could sense the metal's heat without contact. "What is that?" he asked quietly. Zelka's throat went dry. "It's slipping," she said. Odran's posture snapped back into control. "Then we must secure it." "With my hands," Zelka said. "Not with your seal." Odran looked at her, and in that moment the rigid prince and the tired witch stood on the same narrow catwalk with a city balanced on their shoulders. His authority meant nothing if the bells failed. Her defiance meant nothing if she was alone. "Show me," he said at last. Zelka swallowed. She stepped to the 8th bell and placed her palm flat against the collar, eyes closing. The vibration under her skin was wrong now, not just a wobble but a drift, like a song losing its melody. Someone was pulling at it. Her eyes flew open. "It's not where," she said. "This is fresh." Odran's gaze sharpened. "Sabotage." The word landed like a dropped weight. Zelka's stomach clenched. "If someone has been carving or shifting patterns, who has access?" Odran demanded. "Clockrights," Zelka said, mind racing. "Guild workers. Regency inspectors. Anyone with a key and enough nerve." Odran's jaw tightened. "Then the spire must be secured." "It is secured," Zelka snapped, then stopped as the hum beneath her feet surged. The lantern flame jolted, elongating as if pulled upward. The air in the bell chamber thickened. Zelka felt the bell's signatures flare in her mind all at once, a dozen harmonics clashing like startled birds. "No," she whispered. The noon bell's collar glinted. Not with lantern light. With sunlight, sharp, perfect, striking it at an angle it should not have reached yet. Zelka looked toward the slatted windows and saw the sun outside, higher than it had been moments ago. Too high. Time lurched. It wasn't a dramatic snap. It was like missing a step on a stair, a sudden drop in the stomach, a sickening shift. Zelka's vision blurred at the edges. For a heartbeat she couldn't remember the taste of the bread she'd eaten, couldn't remember Junior's face, couldn't remember whether she'd been climbing up or down. Then the world slammed into place again, brutally bright. The sun, visible through the high slats, hung at its zenith. Noon. But the city bells below, faint through stone, had not rung the proper sequence to bring it there. Odran turned sharply to the nearest window. His face, lit by the harshest angle of day, looked carved. "That's impossible," he said. Zelka's hands flew to the bell collar. The vibration was wrong now, violently wrong, as if the bell were trying to sing an hour it had not earned. The engine below groaned, a deep metallic protest that shuddered through the tower's bones. Somewhere in the spire's depths, gears shifted with a sound like a giant drawing breath. Then, far below, the city's ordinary noise, the distant chatter, the clatter of carts, stuttered. Zelka heard it, not with ears but with the bellbinder's sense, a moment repeating. A laugh cut off and began again. A shout echoed twice. A heartbeat stumbled. In the bell chamber, a thin line of light crawled across the brass floor, and as it moved, letters appeared where there had been none, etched into the metal itself, revealed only by perfect noon. Zelka stared at the words as if they were a threat made physical. Odran stepped closer, eyes narrowing. He read aloud, voice tight. "When mercy is unauthorized, noon does not end." Zelka's throat closed. The spire's doors below clanged, one after another, locking in sequence like a verdict. Odran's gaze snapped to Zelka. For the first time since he entered the tower, his control cracked enough to show something raw beneath it. "Fear. Fix it," he said, but it wasn't an order now. It was a plea he didn't know how to voice differently. Zelka's fingers pressed into the brass until it bit her skin. The bell's harmonics screamed in her mind, bright and wrong. Outside, the sun did not move. Time had stopped advancing. And the city was beginning to forget. The first thing Zelka noticed after the locks engaged was how quickly the tower changed its mind about what a hallway was. She and Odran raced down from the bell chamber toward the midstairs, lantern light skittering over rivets and stone. Zelka's feet knew the route, she could have walked it blind on an ordinary day, but the spire was no longer ordinary. A door that should have opened onto the service landing now led to a blank wall of brass plate. A stair that should have descended 3 turns ended in a grated platform hovering over a slow-rolling gear the size of a cottage. The anchor engine was rearranging itself. "Stop," Zelka snapped, grabbing Odran's sleeve before he stepped forward again. His cloak was heavier than she'd expected, thick with embroidery and authority, but his arm beneath it was warm and solid. She released him immediately, as if contact might be misread by the tower, by the guards, by her own heart. He didn't flinch. He only looked down at where her fingers had been, then back up, eyes narrowed in focus. "You said it could seal," he said. "It can," Zelka replied. "It's protecting the pattern. Or trying to. From us." Zelka listened. The thrum beneath her feet was uneven now, still powerful, still moving, but laced with a sharp, high vibration like a kettle about to scream. "From change," she said. "From correction. From anything it doesn't understand." Odran's jaw tightened. "Then we make it understand." "You don't make the spire do anything," Zelka said, and then, because the tower loved punishing arrogance with catastrophe, she softened her voice. "You convince it." Behind them, the 2 Regency guards reached the bell chamber entrance and found the iron grate barred from the inside by a lattice of shifting metal. One of them tried the latch anyway. The latch did not yield. The tower made a sound like a deep chuckle. Not humorous, mechanical. Dismissive. Odran turned and spoke without raising his voice. "Hold position. Do not strike the doors." The guards hesitated. The tower hummed, as if waiting to see whether obedience or force would be chosen. At last the guards nodded, uneasy but compliant, and stepped back. Zelka glanced at Odran. "They listen to you." "They fear the consequences of disobedience," he corrected. "And you?" she asked before she could stop herself. Odran's gaze held hers for a beat. "I fear the consequences of failure," he said, and the honesty in it startled her more than any threat would have. The tower shuddered, and somewhere far below, a bell tried to ring and cut off halfway through, like a throat closing around a note. Zelka's skin went cold. "That's it," she murmured. "That's the stutter." They needed to know what was happening outside. They needed to know how quickly memory was bleeding. They needed. Zelka swallowed Junior. "Odran," she said, and it felt strange to use his name so plainly, as if it meant she had a right to it. "We have to get word to the city medics. To the archivist. People need grounding routines if time repeats." "Grounding," he echoed. "Simple anchors," Zelka said. "Names. Touch. Rhythm. They repeat those on purpose so the mind doesn't repeat by accident." Odran's expression sharpened like a blade finding its edge. "Then we contact them," he said. "How?" Zelka looked around at the sealed corridors, the rotating gearwalk below. "We don't go out," she said. "We go in. The heart chamber has the speaking tubes. If the tower hasn't severed them." Odran's gaze flicked to the gearwalk. "And if it has?" Zelka's mouth went dry. "Then we're alone," she said. "Not just alone in the tower," she corrected silently. "Alone against noon." They moved carefully, choosing the path the spire offered rather than the one Zelka remembered. That was the first rule of bell binding, the rule she'd never put into words until this moment. You could not force alignment by insisting reality behave as expected. You had to meet what was there, and coax it into something true. The corridor narrowed into a maintenance throat, metal ribs arching overhead, pipes exhaling warm air. Zelka's lantern haloed their faces in amber. Odran's features looked less carved here, less public. The brightness he carried seemed muted by the tower's closeness, leaving him simply a man. A tense one, yes. A dangerous one, yes. But human. Ahead, a set of brass doors stood half open, as if the spire hadn't decided whether to bar them completely. Zelka recognized the marking on the frame, mid-core access. She'd only been inside twice, both times under Bastian's watch and with her hands shaking from the pressure of the engine's proximity. Now the tower seemed to invite her. Or lure her. Zelka stepped through first. The mid-core chamber opened around them like the inside of a watch blown up to cathedral scale. Bridges of riveted brass crossed over moving cogs. Counterweights slid in slow, graceful descent. On the far wall, enormous flywheels rotated with hypnotic steadiness, their spokes passing like the arms of a clock. And in the center, suspended above a pit where the engine's deepest components churned, hung a plaque of polished brass that caught the noon light spilling through a high, impossible opening in the tower, an opening Zelka was fairly certain did not exist. Noon found its way in anyway. Letters bloomed across the plaque as the light struck, not painted, not inlaid. Carved so shallowly you could miss them in any other hour. Odran read first, because he had the habit of claiming what he saw. The hour that cannot turn will eat its own name. Zelka's throat tightened. Memory bleed, she said. It's not a metaphor. It's a warning. Odran's gaze moved across the chamber, tracking the moving machinery as if mapping it to a plan. This is where the sabotage was anchored, he said. Zelka went to the nearest flywheel and pressed her hand to its rim. The metal vibrated with a furious steadiness. Beneath that, deeper, she felt a second rhythm, a faint, wrong pulse, like a heartbeat trying to match another heartbeat and failing by a fraction. It's not just one collar, she whispered. It's a chain. Someone threaded wrong resonance into multiple points. Odran turned to her. Can you untie it? Zelka pulled her hand back. Her palm tingled. Not quickly, she admitted. The tower is locked into noon. It will resist any attempt to shift our patterns. Then we remove whatever is enforcing the lock, Odran said. Do you hear how you sound? Zelka's voice sharpened despite herself. Like time is a door you can kick in. Odran's eyes flashed. And do you hear how you sound? He returned, the edge in his voice controlled but present. Like the city should accept its own unraveling because the tower is temperamental. Zelka's breath caught. For a heartbeat, she saw the argument repeating, the same clash, the same heat, looping like the stutter outside. She forced herself to stop, to choose a different turn. Fine, she said, quieter. We remove it. But we do it my way. Odran's shoulders remained tense, but he nodded once. Explain. Zelka swallowed. She stepped toward the central bridge. Beneath the bridge, gears moved like patient teeth. Bell binding is listening, she said. But it's also, she searched for words that wouldn't make him dismiss her as mystical and imprecise. It's negotiation with a system that has its own rules. The engine believes noon is necessary right now. We have to show it noon is killing the city. Odran's mouth tightened. The engine cannot care about the city. It is a machine. Zelka met his gaze. Then why does it lock when threatened? She asked. Why does it hide its riddles until the sun is stuck? Why does it punish force? Odran hesitated. Just a fraction. Enough to be human again. What is it, then? He asked. Zelka looked down into the pit of moving brass. It's a promise, she said. And promises have habits. He didn't answer. His silence was heavy with thought. They crossed the bridge, step by careful step, as the metal vibrated beneath their boots. Halfway across, the bridge shuddered, as if the spire had noticed their weight and disapproved. Zelka stopped. She listened. The vibration underfoot changed pitch, rising. Don't move, she warned. Odran froze, cloak lifting slightly in the warm current. His gaze flicked to her face, then down to the bridge. It's about to shift, he said, reading the mechanics. Yes, Zelka breathed. And if it shifts while we're on it? The bridge lurched. Not down. Sideways. The whole span rotated a quarter turn, transforming from a straight path into an angled ramp. Zelka's balance went, and she grabbed the nearest handrail. Her lantern swung violently, its flame sputtering. Odran's hand shot out and closed around her forearm, anchoring her. His grip was firm, sure, not squeezing, not possessive, simply holding her in place against the tower's attempt to fling her into the machinery. For a heartbeat, Zelka's mind had room for only the sensation, his hand through her sleeve, steady warmth against her skin, the certainty of it. Her pulse kicked hard, and for an instant she hated herself for noticing. This was not the time for softness. But softness, she realized, was also an anchor. A moment that insisted on being singular. Hold, Odran said quietly. I'm holding, Zelka rasped, and then, because she couldn't bear the fragility of that moment, she added, let go. He did not let go immediately. His eyes stayed on her face. If I let go and you fall, you will die, he said, as if stating a plain fact. That is not acceptable. Zelka's throat tightened. She hated that those words warmed something in her chest. She hated it most because she believed him. The bridge completed its shift and locked with a clang. The vibration settled. Odran released her forearm. His hand fell away like a door closing, clean, controlled. We continue, he said. Zelka nodded, swallowing hard. At the far end of the bridge, a narrow platform led to a brass wall covered in etched panels. Zelka recognized the panels, maintenance records in the spire's own language, carved by artisans long dead. But now, in the unwavering noon light, fresh lines glimmered among the old riddles cut shallow, precise, confident. Zelka traced them without touching, afraid the tower would interpret contact as an attempt to command. These weren't here, she murmured. Not when I last came through. Odran leaned in. His shoulder brushed hers for an instant, brief contact, unavoidable in the narrow space. Zelka felt it like a spark. He read the new carving aloud. Law is a lantern. Who holds it decides who is seen. Zelka's mouth went dry. That's not the tower speaking, she said. That's a person. Someone who thinks they're clever. Odran's gaze sharpened. A person with access, he said. Zelka looked at him. You, she said flatly. Your people. Odran's jaw tightened. Not my people, he said. The Regency's. Zelka snorted, then regretted it. Same sun, she muttered. Odran's eyes flashed, but he didn't rise to it. Instead he took a slow breath, as if forcing himself to stay inside the present moment rather than retreat into the armor of office. If a chancellor did this, he said, it was not authorized by the Solar House. Zelka's laugh was bitter. Unauthorized, she echoed, and the word tasted different now. Not just accusation. A knife that could cut both ways. Odran's gaze flicked to her. You think I came to punish you, he said. You came to take the tower, Zelka replied. I came because the reports said the spire was slipping, he said, voice low. Because the last city that lost its bells lost more than ours. It lost its history, its identity. It became pliable. Zelka stilled. Pliable, she repeated. Odran's expression tightened as if he'd said something he hadn't meant to. Easier to govern, he admitted, quieter. I did not want that to happen here. The confession landed between them like a dropped gear. Zelka stared at him, trying to decide whether the honesty was strategy. Then she heard it, the faintest echo of laughter from below, repeating too quickly like someone outside the tower laughing at the same joke twice, unaware it had already happened. Memory bleed is starting, Zelka thought, and her chest tightened. We need the speaking tubes, she said. Now. They moved deeper, following the shifting corridors until they reached a spiral stair of metal steps bolted into the tower's ribs. The steps vibrated underfoot. Zelka's lantern flame steadied, then wavered again, as if time itself couldn't decide how air should move. At the top of the stair was a small chamber with a rack of brass tubes, communication pipes that carried voices down to different stations in the tower and out to the city offices connected by old infrastructure. Zelka nearly cried with relief. She seized the tube labeled Bellwood Medic. She put her mouth to it and spoke, forcing her voice into calm. June 1st, 2023. If you can hear me, time has locked at noon. Begin grounding protocols. Names. Touch. Rhythm. Keep people together. Keep them repeating on purpose. She listened. At first there was only static hiss and the low moan of the engine. Then, faintly, Junior's voice crackled through, distorted but present. Zell. Junior sounded breathless. Zell, thank the hours. People are, her words stuttered, repeating a fragment. People are forgetting. I had a man call his own wife miss twice. We're doing what we can. Zelka closed her eyes, relief and terror tangling. Keep doing it, she said. Tell Merrow, tell the archivist to record everything. Patterns matter. Don't let the story get eaten. Junior's voice hissed. Who is that with you? She demanded sharply. Zelka's throat went tight. She glanced at Odran. He stood a respectful step back, watching her, listening without intruding. "The Noon Prince," Zelka said, and heard Junior swear. "Does he help?" Junior asked. Zelka hesitated. Odran's gaze held hers. Not demanding her defense. Not pleading. Waiting for truth. "His here," Zelka said carefully. "And his listening." Junior snorted. "If he listens with his hands instead of his seal, maybe we'll live to complain about him tomorrow." "If there is a tomorrow," Zelka murmured. Junior's voice softened, just a little. "Make one," she said. "And Zel eat something. You sound hollow." The line hissed and broke. Zelka leaned her forehead against the cool brass tube for a heartbeat. Hollow. The word hit too close. She lifted her head and forced herself to turn back to the work. Odran was watching her, his expression unreadable in the lantern light. "She trusts you," he said. "She doesn't trust you," Zelka corrected. Odran's mouth tightened. "She trusts you to decide whether I am useful," he said. Zelka's chest tightened in an unexpected place. Responsibility had always sat on her shoulders like a familiar weight, but this was different. This was not just keeping bells from failing. This was choosing whether to let a prince inside her circle of necessity. "We have a saboteur with access," Zelka said, to avoid the feeling. "And a tower that thinks Noon is protection." Odran nodded. "Then we show the tower Noon is a weapon," he said. Zelka looked at him. "How?" Odran stepped closer to the etched panel in the speaking tube chamber. His finger hovered over a small stamped seal Regency standard on a pipe junction. "These tubes run through the authorization office as well," he said. "If the saboteur is a chancellor, he will be monitoring." Zelka's stomach dropped. "Then he knows we're alive." Odran's eyes were flint. "Good," he said. "Let him know we are not trapped prey." Zelka swallowed. "That sounds like a threat." "It is," Odran replied. The sudden ferocity in him startled her. She had expected stiffness. Not this sharp protectiveness. "Listen," Zelka said, forcing herself back into her craft. She stepped to the wall and pressed her palm lightly to the brass. Closed her eyes. Let her bellbinder sense unfurl. At first there was only the tower's roar, gears, chains, friction, the massive heartbeat of engineered time. Then, beneath it, she found the wrong rhythm again, a high, thin resonance threaded like wire through the structure. It wasn't coming from the bells now. It was coming from deeper, closer to the heart chamber. "There," she breathed. "The enforcement point. Something is holding Noon in place." Odran leaned in. "Lead," he said. Zelka opened her eyes. "You follow my rules," she warned. Odran's gaze held hers. "Then tell me your rules," he said. Zelka hesitated. No one asked her that. People demanded results, questioned her authorization, feared her costs, but no one asked for her rules. She drew a breath. "Don't touch the collars," she said. "Don't strike metal in anger. Don't shout inside the engine chambers. And if I say stop," she paused, remembering his hand on her forearm, the way the tower had shifted without mercy. "You stop." Odran nodded once. "Agreed," he said. They moved again, deeper and lower, following stairways that curved the wrong way, corridors that shifted as they walked. More Noon-revealed carvings appeared, each one a taunt. "Compassion is chaos," one read. "Order is kindness," said another. Zelka felt the words like hooks in the mind, trying to force a choice between extremes. She kept walking anyway, refusing the riddle's demanded answer. At last they reached a door that was not a door, a circular brass iris set into the wall, sealed shut, etched with the sun emblem and the older city crest intertwined like a forced marriage. Zelka's lantern light slid over it. The iris did not open. Odran stepped forward. Zelka caught his sleeve again, reflex. He looked down at her hand. She released him quickly. "I am not going to strike it," he said, voice low, almost amused. Zelka scowled. "Good," she muttered. Odran examined the iris. "This is Solar Writ," he said. "An authorization seal. It will respond to command phrases." Zelka's mouth went dry. "And if the saboteur wrote the phrase?" Odran's eyes flicked to her. "Then we do not speak it," he said. Zelka stared at him. You can't open it without speaking. Odran's expression was grim. Then we open it without speaking, he said. Zelka almost laughed, then realized he meant it. He was already scanning the rim for mechanical weaknesses, looking for where force could be applied without striking, pressure, leverage, precision. Not law. Craft. Bastian would approve, Zelka thought wryly, and then the thought cut her with its hardness. Why was she imagining Bastian's approval while standing beside a prince? Because, a quiet part of her answered, you're looking for proof he can be more than his title. Zelka stepped closer to the iris. She pressed her fingertips to the brass, barely touching. Listening. The seal hummed with solar rit, clean, bright, rigid. But underneath it she felt the tower's older resonance, stubborn as river stone. The seal was imposed. The tower endured. It's not just solar, she murmured. The spire is, letting it sit on top. Like a lid. Odran's gaze sharpened. Then the tower might allow you, he said. Zelka's stomach tightened. It might also punish me, she replied. It punishes unauthorized attempts. Odran's eyes held hers. Then it will have to punish me too, he said. Zelka stared. Why would you? Because the city will not survive your absence, he said simply. And I will not permit that. The words were clean. Not romantic. Not flirtation. Yet they landed with the weight of a promise. Zelka swallowed hard and looked back at the iris. All right, she said softly. We do it together. She placed her palm flat against the seal. The brass was cool at first, then warmed under her skin. She closed her eyes and hummed a low note, not a command, but an offering. A resonance that said, I am not here to take. I am here to mend. Odran did not touch the seal. He stood close enough that Zelka could feel the heat of him at her shoulder, close enough that if the tower shifted again, he could catch her without thinking. His presence was a steady pressure in the air. Zelka let her hum find the tower's older rhythm under the solar rit. She imagined the seal as a rigid overlay on a living bone, and she sought the seam where they met. Then the cost came, sharp and sudden. A memory rose, Zelka at 16, standing outside the authorization office with a folded petition in her hands, the ink smudged from sweat. A clerk behind the window saying, without malice, that bell binding was not a recognized practice and therefore could not be licensed. Zelka's own voice, too small, asking what she was supposed to do when the bells failed. The clerk shrugging, bored, and saying, that is not our concern. The memory blurred. Zelka's breath hitched. She fought to hold the clerk's face, the exact angle of his indifferent mouth, because even painful memories could be anchors. But the edges softened, the details draining away like dye in water. Zelka's throat tightened with a sound she refused to let become a sob. Odran's voice came close to her ear, low and steady. Breathe, he said. Stay with the present. Zelka's eyes snapped open. Don't, she began, furious at him for witnessing her cost. But his gaze was not pitying. It was intent. As if her pain had simply become part of the work, and he would not waste it on judgment. The iris made a soft click. Petals of brass shifted, opening slowly, reluctantly, like an eye forced awake. Air spilled out warm, metallic, tinged with ozone. The hum from beyond was deeper, louder, like standing near the heart of a storm. Zelka's hand fell away. She stared at the opening, breath shaking. Odran watched the iris, then looked at her. You opened it, he said quietly. I didn't command it, Zelka whispered. I persuaded. Odran's gaze held hers for a beat longer than necessary. Then lead me, he said. They stepped through the iris into a chamber that seemed to swallow lantern light. The walls were not stone here but interlocking brass plates, each engraved with sequences so dense they looked like woven cloth. In the center hung a massive pendulum, frozen mid-swing, caught at the exact highest point, as if noon itself had seized it and refused to let it fall. And beneath the pendulum, set into a dais of gear teeth, was a small object that made Zelka's stomach turn. A sun-stamped seal plate Regency standard newly bolted into the tower's heart. The tower had been shackled with law. Odran's face went very still. Zelka felt the wrong resonance emanating from the plate like a high whine. It was forcing noon into permanence, overriding the bell sequence. A lid clamped over the city's breathing hours. Whoever did this, Zelka said, voice raw, didn't just sabotage a bell. He tried to own time. Odran's eyes were cold. Yes, he said. And he chose my symbol to do it. Zelka looked at him. In the lantern light, the gold thread at his collar seemed less like glory and more like a brand. What do we do? She asked, and hated that the question sounded like trust. Odran stepped toward the seal plate. He stopped before touching it, remembering her rule. He looked back at Zelka. Can you unbind it? He asked. Zelka listened to the plate's resonance. It was bright, rigid, layered with Solar Writ authorization codes and command phrases. It would resist her persuasion. It would demand payment. She swallowed. Yes, she said. But it will cost. Odran's gaze did not waver. Then we pay, he said. Zelka's chest tightened. We. Odran's expression was steady, and for the first time, Zelka saw what fear had carved into his rigidity, the refusal to let others bear the weight alone, because that was how catastrophes happened. If you pay alone, you will become hollow, Odran said quietly. The word mirrored Junior's. And the city cannot afford that. I will not allow it. Zelka stared at him, throat tight. You can't pay bell-binding costs, she said. You don't have the craft. Odran's voice was low, precise. I have authority, he said. And I have memories. Zelka's breath caught. The idea of a prince offering memory as currency inside a tower that ate identity felt impossible, and yet, exactly what the riddle's taunt demanded. The pendulum above them trembled, as if listening. Zelka looked at the seal plate again. She felt the tower's older rhythm beneath it, suffering under the imposed lid. She felt the city outside, bright and brittle, struggling to remember its own name. And she felt Odran beside her, radiant and rigid and feared, but standing inside the gears with her, close enough to share the danger. All right, Zelka whispered. Then we do it together. The noon light beyond the sealed chamber did not move. But for the first time since the locks engaged, Zelka felt something shift inside the spire, not the hour, not yet, but the possibility of it. As if the tower had just noticed that law and compassion were finally standing in the same room. Zelka crouched beside the sun-stamped seal plate and kept her hands in her lap as if they might betray her by moving too quickly. The brass of the dais was warm beneath her knees, humming with a note that made the back of her throat ache. Above them, the great pendulum hung at the crest of its arc, frozen in the moment before it should have surrendered to gravity. Noon held its breath. Odran stood a careful pace away, shoulders squared, eyes tracking every line of the plate as if staring hard enough could make law become mercy. He looked out of place in the tower's heart, too clean, too bright, but the longer they stood there, the more the spire seemed to treat him as another piece of the mechanism, a weight that could shift the balance if placed correctly. Zelka closed her eyes and listened. The seal plate sang in two voices. One was the Solar Writ, bright, rigid, layered with commands and permissions, a melody that insisted it was the only melody allowed. The other was older, the spire's own resonance, deep and river-slow, suffering under the imposed lid like a lung forced to breathe through cloth. Zelka swallowed. She could unbind it. She could. But persuasion didn't work on a thing that believed itself righteous. This isn't just a lock, she said quietly, opening her eyes. It's a claim. It's saying, this hour belongs to the Regency. Odran's jaw tightened. Then we remove the claim, he said. Zelka gave him a sharp look. You keep saying we like it makes the tower kinder. It makes us honest, Odran replied. Zelka looked back to the plate. The sunlight that should not have been able to reach this chamber was here anyway, thin and perfect, sliding over the embossed sun. It made the symbol look holy. It made Zelka want to spit. She set her palm on the dais beside the plate, not touching the plate itself. The vibration crawled up her arm, into her ribs, into the place behind her eyes where memories lived like paper in a box. Her voice came out low. If I do this, it will take something, she warned. Odran didn't move. I know. You don't, Zelka said, and she hated the tremor in her words. Knowing it in law and knowing it in bone are different. Odran's gaze held hers. The lantern light turned the gold in his eyes to something softer, less like metal and more like stormlight caught in cloud. Then let me learn it in bone, he said. Zelka stared at him. The tower hummed, impatient. You can't bell-bind, she said, because she needed a reason to argue that wasn't fear. You don't have the ear. I have a life, Odran said simply. And I am offering it. Something in Zelka's chest tightened in a way she refused to name. She looked down at her hands, at the small scars along her knuckles from years of climbing and repairing and being bitten by brass edges. She remembered Junior's voice through the tube, "You sound hollow," and she pictured that hollowness spreading until she became a person made only of duty. She could not do that again. Not alone. All right, Zelka whispered, and the word felt like stepping onto a bridge that might rotate beneath her. Stand close. Not touching. Just close. Odran moved without hesitation, stopping at her shoulder. The heat of him seeped through the air like a hearth. Zelka's breath caught, and she hated that she noticed. She hated it the way she hated the sun being stuck, because it was unavoidable, because it altered everything with its presence. She closed her eyes again. She hummed a tone she'd never used outside the spire's deepest chambers, a resonance meant to speak to the tower's oldest bones. The note filled her skull, vibrating her teeth. She traced a slow circle in the air above the seal plate, shaping the sound into intent, not command, but invitation. Not take, but loosen. The plate resisted. Zelka felt it like a stubborn jaw clenching. The solar writ flared, bright and sharp, trying to drown her hum in pure, clean authority. Her lantern flame thinned as if squeezed. The frozen pendulum trembled, a hair's breadth. The tower was listening. The tower was afraid. Zelka pushed the hum down into her diaphragm, deeper, steadier. She sought the seam where imposed law ended and the spire's own promise began. Then the cost arrived like a blade sliding between ribs. A memory rose without her permission. Zelka at 9, standing on the canal bridge with her father's hand wrapped around hers, watching the spire's bells ring in a smooth afternoon sequence. The sun had been lowering then, gilding the water. Her father had lifted her so she could see the clock face clearly and said, "Look. That's what it means to keep a promise. Even when no one is watching." The warmth of that moment surged up through her chest. And then it began to blur. Zelka's breath hitched. She tried to hold the weight of her father's hand, the exact angle of sunlight on the water, the scent of riverweed and warm bread. It slipped. Not all at once. Not like a ripped page. Like ink fading. Zelka's throat tightened. She made a sound between a gasp and a snarl, and the hum wavered. Odran's voice came close, low and steady, as if he were a bell she could tune to. "Zelka," he said. "Look at me." Her eyes snapped open. For a heartbeat, she didn't know where she were. The brass walls seemed too close. The pendulum too still. The light too cruel. Odran's face was right there, controlled, intent, and now threaded with something else, fierce concern stripped of ceremony. "Name 3 things you can feel," he said. Zelka stared. Her mind clawed at the missing edges of her father's voice. "What? Now?" Odran said. Zelka swallowed hard. She forced herself into her body. "Metal," she rasped. "Heat." "My knees," she pressed her palm to the dais. "Vibration." Odran nodded once, as if this were a procedure he'd memorized for emergencies. "Good. Name 1 thing you can hear." "The engine," Zelka whispered. "And 1 thing you can see," Odran said, gaze unwavering. Zelka looked at his eyes. The gold there was real. Present. "You," she said before she could stop herself. For a flicker of a second, something softened across Odran's mouth, not quite a smile and not quite anything safe. Then he steadied again. "Stay," he murmured. "Keep your hum. I will carry the weight if it tries to take you." Zelka's fingers tightened on the edge of the dais. Her hum found its path again, trembling but true. The seal plate shuddered. A hairline seam appeared around one corner, so slight it might have been imagined. But Zelka felt it, the solar writ loosening its bite. Then the tower struck back. The frozen pendulum above them jerked, not into a swing, but into a violent twitch, as if noon itself had flinched. The wrong resonance screamed. Somewhere far above, the noon bell tried to ring and choked on silence. Outside the tower, the city's noise stuttered again. Zelka could sense it through the spire's bones like a ripple through water. A panic gusted through her, not hers alone, thousands of minds catching on the same second. No, Zelka whispered. It's worsening. Odran's gaze snapped upward, then to her. We do not stop, he said. We might kill them if we keep pulling, Zelka said, voice raw. If the tower clamps harder, it will tear the hour pattern instead of letting go. Odran's jaw flexed. He looked at the plate, the seam, the trembling pendulum. Then we stabilize while we loosen, he said. Zelka stared at him. How? Odran stepped back from her shoulder and reached into his cloak, drawing out something Zelka hadn't seen before, a narrow strip of parchment bound in a metal frame, the edges stamped with tiny sun sigils. An authorization ribbon. Zelka's stomach twisted. Don't, she warned. If you write over the spire with Solar it will. I am not writing over it, Odran said, voice tight. I am bracing it. He held the ribbon at the edge of the seal plate without touching the plate itself, angling it so the sun sigils faced the brass like mirrors. He whispered words Zelka didn't recognize, not commands, not permissions, but something that sounded like a vow with too many rules. The Solar writ on the plate flared as if answering its own kin. For a terrible moment, Zelka thought he'd made it worse. Then the flare folded inward, contained like a lantern shuttered to keep its light from blinding. The screaming resonance dropped by a fraction. The pendulum's twitch eased. Zelka's breath came out in a shaky exhale. What did you do? She whispered. Odran's voice was harsh with concentration. I invoked a containment clause, he said. A protocol for unstable civic enchantments. It forces authorized magic to hold its pattern inside itself. Zelka blinked, stunned. You used the law against the law. Odran's eyes flicked to her, brief and fierce. I am learning, he said. The tower's hum changed again, still wrong, still noonlocked, but no longer screaming. Zelka's shoulders sagged with relief so sharp it almost hurt. She forced her hands back into steadiness. All right, she whispered. Then keep bracing. I'll keep loosening. They worked in tandem, minutes stretching into something that felt like hours even though the sun refused to move. Zelka hummed, threading her resonance into the seam. Odran held his containment ribbon steady, sweat beading along his hairline despite the cool metal air. Each time the plate tried to snap back into rigid authority, his whispered clauses caught it and folded it inward. It was intimate, Zelka realized with a jolt. Not in the way that made her blush, but in the way that made her acutely aware of breath and proximity and shared effort. They were inside the same rhythm now, his steadiness catching her falters, her listening guiding his authority into something less violent. And the tower noticed. As the seam widened by the width of a fingernail, new letters gleamed along the dais revealed by the unchanging noon light, shallow etchings hidden beneath the seal plate's edge. Zelka's stomach clenched as she read them. Not a bell. Not a gear. A tithe. Her hum faltered. The words stabbed straight into the place where her erased memories lived. What does it mean? She whispered. Odran leaned in, careful not to jostle her. His gaze locked onto the etching. For the first time since he stepped into the tower, Zelka saw something like shock in him, not dramatic, not loud. A slow, dawning horror. A tithe is a sanctioned taking, he said quietly. A levy. A contribution. Zelka's throat went dry. Of what? The tower answered with a second line, revealed as the seam widened further. Remembering fuels the sun. Zelka went cold. Memory, she whispered. Odran's face went very still. No, he murmured, but it sounded like denial that had nowhere to go. Zelka's mind raced. The slips, she said, voice tight. The small threads Junior mentioned. Someone's been drawing memory out, even before noon locked. Odran's gaze snapped to her. That is not permitted, he said, and the certainty in his voice was desperate. Zelka almost laughed. Isn't it? She hissed. Or is it just permitted where no one has the words to protest? Odran's jaw flexed. He didn't answer immediately. His grip on the containment ribbon tightened until his knuckles went pale. A sound echoed from somewhere behind them, a faint scrape, too purposeful to be the engine's constant motion. Zelka's head turned sharply. The lantern light trembled across the chamber, catching on a narrow maintenance seam in the brass wall, a panel that should have been flush, now lifted by a fraction. Someone was inside the tower with them. "Don't break the brace," Zelka whispered. Odran's eyes flicked to the panel. His posture shifted, protective without theatricality. He set the containment ribbon in place, wedged carefully against a ridge, then moved one measured step between Zelka and the seam. "Show yourself," Odran said, voice quiet and deadly. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the panel eased open, and a man slid out like a rat finding daylight. He wasn't dressed in full Regency armor. He wore a worker's leather apron stained with oil and brass dust, with a small sun pin at his collar, low-level authorization. His hair was dark and lank with sweat. His hands were stained the way Bastian's were, but his eyes were too quick, too hunted. Silas Penth, Zelka thought, recognizing him from the tower workforce. A brass scribe. Someone who carved records into plates. Someone who could carve riddles, too. Silas froze when he saw Odran, his face draining. "Prince," he blurted. Odran didn't move. "Why are you here?" he asked. Silas's gaze flicked to Zelka, then away, as if her existence was an inconvenience he'd hoped to avoid. I was told to check the heart chamber seal," he stammered. "Routine. Just routine." Zelka's voice went cold. "At noon," she said. "While the city forgets itself." Silas licked his lips. "I didn't do that," he said quickly. "I didn't lock it. His words caught, stuttering with panic. "I only carved what I was paid to carve." Odran's eyes narrowed. "Paid by whom?" Silas flinched. His gaze darted to the seal plate, to the widening seam, to the revealed words about tithe and remembering. His breathing sped, shallow. "You shouldn't have loosened it," he whispered. "You shouldn't." "He said you'd make it worse. He said the city would beg for rescue." Zelka's stomach turned. "Who?" she demanded. Silas's eyes flicked up to Odran's collar, to the sun emblem. "Chancellor Varro," he whispered. Odran went very still. Zelka felt the tower's hum deepen, like a creature hearing its name spoken in anger. "Varro Lask," Silas added, as if the full name might secure him some kind of mercy. "Authorization, Chancellor." He said it was lawful. He said the tower needed stability. Zelka's hands trembled on the dais. She forced her hum to continue, thin and steady, because if she stopped now the plate would snap shut and the tower would clamp down harder. "Lawful," she repeated, voice shaking with rage. "He carved riddles about mercy while he stole minds." Silas's shoulders hunched. "He said it wasn't stealing," he pleaded. "He said it was a tithe. A small taking. A civic contribution." "A civic contribution doesn't make a mother forget her child's face," Zelka snapped. Silas flinched, and for a second something like shame crossed his face. He looked down at his stained hands. "It got worse than he promised," he whispered. "When the noon lock engaged, the tithe," he swallowed hard. "It started spilling instead of siphoning. Like a cracked pipe. People are losing more than he planned." Odran's voice was very quiet. "And what did he plan?" he asked. Silas's mouth trembled. "To make the spire fail just enough that the Regency could seize it openly," he said. "To make the city desperate. To make your inspection," he glanced at Odran, fear flaring. "To make it necessary." Zelka felt sick. "And if it fails entirely?" she asked. Silas's gaze darted away. "There's a failsafe," he whispered. "If the seal plate is removed wrong, the tower goes silent. The bells stop. And when they stop," his voice cracked, "the last span of memory gets wiped clean. The city forgets what happened. People forget why they're afraid. They forget who to blame." The words landed like a weight in Zelka's gut. Odran's face was carved from stone now. "He built a weapon," he said. Silas nodded miserably. "He said it was mercy," he whispered. "A clean slate." Zelka's hum wavered as nausea rose. Mercy. Clean slate. The same taunts etched into brass, now revealed as deliberate cruelty. Odran took one step forward, and Silas flinched back as if expecting a strike. Odran didn't strike. He didn't raise his voice. He only looked at Silas with a coldness that made the air feel sharper. "Where is Chancellor Varro?" Odran asked. Silas swallowed. "Authorization office," he whispered. "He'll be monitoring. Waiting." Odran's gaze flicked to Zelka, then to the seal plate, then back to Silas. "Go," he said. Silas blinked, stunned. "Go." "Down," Odran said, voice iron. "To the speaking tubes. Tell the medic and the archivist what you told us. Tell them the memory tithe is real. Tell them the Chancellor did this. And if you lie," his eyes narrowed. "I will know." Silas nodded frantically. He didn't wait for permission, he scrambled back through the maintenance seam, vanishing into the tower's ribs like a terrified thought. Zelka's shoulders shook with the effort of keeping her hum steady. The seam around the plate had widened another fraction. The revealed etchings glimmered like exposed bone. Odran returned to her side and took up the containment ribbon again, bracing the solar rit as it tried to snap back into domination. His breathing was controlled, but his voice, when he spoke, was low with something Zelka had never heard from him before. "Fury. This cannot stand," Odran said. Zelka's laugh was harsh. "Welcome to my morning," she muttered, and then her voice cracked. "They'll blame me. They'll say the witch did it." Odran's gaze snapped to hers. "They will not," he said. "You don't know how quickly people believe what's convenient," Zelka whispered. "A stamp is easier to trust than a person." Odran's eyes held hers with relentless steadiness. "Then I will be inconvenient," he said. "I will say your name in rooms that prefer you voiceless." The words struck Zelka harder than the memory costs did, because they offered something she had stopped letting herself want, protection that didn't demand obedience in return. The pendulum above them trembled again, and Zelka felt the city's stutter ripple through the tower bones. She imagined Junior holding a stranger's hands and repeating his name until it stuck. She imagined Merrow scratching frantic notes, trying to trap truth on paper before it bled away. "We can't just remove the plate," Zelka said, voice tight. "The failsafe will trigger." Silence. "Memory wipe." Odran's jaw flexed. "Then we do not remove it wrong," he said. Zelka stared at the seam, listening. The tower's older resonance was straining beneath the imposed lid. It wanted to breathe. It also wanted to survive. If they tore it too fast, it would clamp into silence out of panic. "We have to retune the hour sequence," Zelka said slowly. "Not force it. We have to convince the tower that moving past noon is safer than staying." Odran's gaze sharpened. "How?" Zelka swallowed. Her mind went to the bells, to the noon bell's bright signature that dominated the others. "We need the noon bell collar," she said. "The true source. If Varro's seal plate is the lid, the noon bell is the pressure beneath it. If we retune the noon bell's agreement with the engine, the lid loses leverage." Odran's eyes flicked upward, as if he could see through brass and stone to the bell chamber above. "Then we go there," he said. Zelka's throat tightened. "The tower will fight us," she warned. "It's already rearranging paths." Odran looked at her, and for the first time the title he wore, Prince, Emissary, Authority, seemed smaller than the choice in front of him. "Then we go anyway," he said, and his voice softened by a fraction. "Together." Zelka's hum faltered for half a breath, and Odran's hand tightened on the containment ribbon, catching the pattern before it snapped shut. He didn't touch her, but his steadiness held her the way his arm had held her on the rotating bridge, anchoring without claiming. Zelka drew a shaky breath and resumed the note. The seam widened another sliver. The plate was loosening, just enough that the tower could feel the difference. For the first time since noon locked, Zelka sensed something else beneath the engine's roar. A faint, distant yearning in the spire's older resonance, like a clock that remembered what dusk felt like. Outside, the sun did not move. But inside the tower's heart, law had begun to crack, and the promise beneath it was starting, slowly, stubbornly, to pull itself free. The way back up did not resemble the way down. Zelka felt it the moment they left the heart chamber. The spire's corridors had shifted again, reshaping like a jaw that had decided what it wanted to chew. The maintenance throat they'd used to enter now ran into a blank curve of brass that hummed with refusal. A stairwell that should have spiraled toward the bell chamber ended at a grated platform suspended above a slow-turning gear, the teeth passing beneath like patient threats. Noon held everything in an unblinking grip. Zelka kept her lantern low and her steps smaller than usual, as if she could make herself less objectionable to the tower by shrinking. Odran moved beside her with controlled economy, cloak brushed tight around his body to keep it from catching on shifting rails. He looked different now, not less radiant, but less distant. The fury she'd heard in him still lived behind his calm, and it sharpened his attention into something almost frightening. "You're listening," Zelka said without meaning to. Odran glanced at her. "You told me to," he replied. "I told you not to shout," she corrected, then realized the words were a shield against the sensation of being heard. She focused hard on the vibration under her boots instead, letting the spire's rhythm fill the space where feelings tried to rise. The engine's hum was still wrong, too bright, too tight, like metal stretched in heat. But beneath it, Zelka could sense the older resonance she'd brushed in the heart chamber, a low pulse that wanted to fall forward into afternoon like a held breath wanting release. "Keep the tower calm," she murmured. "If it panics, it will clamp." Odran's jaw tightened. "And if it clamps?" Zelka swallowed. "Silence," she said. "Bells stop. Memory wipes clean." Odran didn't ask her how much memory. He didn't need to. The answer was written in the way the city had been shaped by fear for generations. A metallic clank echoed from somewhere above them, harder than the engine's steady motion, too abrupt. Then another. Then the faintest tremor of voices, distant and distorted by brass and stone. Someone had entered the spire. Zelka's stomach dropped. "His coming," she whispered. Odran's gaze sharpened. "Varro?" Zelka nodded. The tower's vibrations changed pitch, as if the spire itself recognized the Chancellor's approach with something like disgust. Or fear. Zelka couldn't tell the difference anymore. They moved faster, not running inside the spire invited punishment, but quickening their pace with the urgency of people who knew the next minute might not belong to them. The path the tower offered narrowed into a vertical shaft with bolted ladder rungs and a rotating ring of gears that slid around the shaft like a collar tightening. Zelka stopped, listening. The ring's motion was timed. There was a moment, brief as an inhale, when the rungs aligned and passage was possible. "Wait," she warned. Odran waited, still as carved stone. The ring shifted. For a heartbeat the gap opened. "Now," Zelka breathed. They climbed. Zelka went first, lantern clipped to her belt to free her hands. The rungs vibrated under her palms, alive with the tower's tension. Halfway up, the gear ring began to slide again, the opening closing behind them. Odran climbed close enough that she could feel the heat of him in the narrow shaft. Not touching, he obeyed her rule, but near, steady, present. The closeness did something strange to Zelka's mind. It made the moment singular. It made the tower's attempt to repeat and stutter feel less powerful. A rung slipped under her hand, oil, or sweat, or her own trembling. Zelka's foot skidded and her heart lurched. Odran's hand shot out and caught her at the waist through cloth and belt, firm and sure. For an instant, she was held against the iron certainty of his arm, the world stopped tilting, and she could breathe again. "Don't," she rasped, furious at herself for needing him. Odran didn't let go yet. His voice was low in her ear. "Breathe," he said, and it wasn't a command. It was a promise to keep her from falling if her breath failed. Zelka's throat tightened. She forced her fingers to find purchase again. When her footing steadied, Odran released her immediately, clean as a door closing, but not cold. She climbed the rest of the way with her lungs burning, not from effort but from the aching awareness that she was not alone in this shaft, in this noon, in this fight. They emerged into a service corridor just below the bell chamber. The air here was cooler, tinged with old dust and oil. The tower's hum was louder, closer to the bell's own signatures. Zelka felt the noon bell's presence like pressure behind her ribs, bright, insistent, arrogant. And the voices were clearer now. Under solar mandate, a man was saying, smooth as polished brass. "The spire has become unstable under unauthorized handling. We will secure it, prince or no. Varro." Zelka's skin went icy. She moved toward the bell chamber entrance, but Odran caught her wrist, not yanking, not restraining, simply stopping her from stepping into a blade. Wait, he murmured. Zelka swallowed and listened. Varro's voice continued, threaded with calm certainty. We will reset the sequence. A clean silence. The city will forget this disruption, and with forgetting, panic will end. Then we resume in proper order, under proper governance. A second voice, one of Varro's guards, asked something Zelka couldn't make out. Varro answered, and his words turned the blood in Zelka's veins to frost. The witch will be contained. If she resists, remove her. The tower does not require her, only compliance. Zelka's hand tightened around her lantern strap until her fingers ached. The witch. Not her name. Not her work. Just a category of inconvenience. Odran's grip on her wrist tightened by a fraction. Zelka felt it as controlled rage. He leaned close enough that his breath warmed her ear. Do not speak yet, he said. Let me open with authority. Then you speak with truth. Zelka's chest tightened. She wanted to reject the idea of needing his authority, but she also wanted, desperately, someone to stand between her and Varro's stamp. All right, she whispered. Odran released her wrist and stepped forward. His posture changed as he moved, shoulders squaring, chin lifting, that invisible mantle of brightness settling over him like a sunlit cloak. In the narrow corridor, he looked suddenly larger than the brass around him. He entered the bell chamber. Zelka followed a pace behind. The chamber was harsher than she'd ever seen it, flooded with relentless light. The slatted windows blazed as if the sun had pressed its face against them. Dust motes hung suspended like glitter caught mid-fall. Varro Lask stood on the catwalk near the noon bell, hands clasped behind his back in an imitation of princely calm. His hair was dark and neatly combed, his robes a deep cream with gold trim, less radiant than Odran's, but more calculated. His face held the kind of pleasant expression that could sign a death sentence and call it maintenance. 2 guards flanked him. Another pair stood nearer the bell chamber entrance, blocking the stairwell down. Bastian was there too, held by an armored hand on his shoulder. Junior wasn't thank the hours, but Zelka could see fear in Bastian's eyes, and anger held tight behind it. Varro turned as Odran approached, and his smile widened into something deferential. Your Highness, he said, voice warm as honey. You arrived sooner than expected. I was just taking steps to stabilize the situation. Odran stopped within sight of the noon bell, just far enough from Varro to make clear that proximity was not intimacy. You entered the spire without my consent, Odran said, voice even. Under what authority? Varro spread his hands slightly, palms outward, false openness. Under the Authorization Chancellor's emergency jurisdiction for public infrastructure, he said. The tower has locked. The city is in distress. It is my duty to act. It is your duty to report to me, Odran replied. Varro's smile did not falter. Of course. That is why I am relieved you are here. We can proceed with a reset together. The simplest solution is a controlled silence. The bells cease, the system clears, and we restart with a proper authorized sequence. Zelka's stomach lurched. Controlled silence. Clean slate. Mercy carved into brass like a joke. Odran's gaze flicked once, briefly, to Zelka, a silent check that she was still behind him, still present. Then he looked back at Varro. And the cost to the city, he asked. Varro's eyes softened into practiced sympathy. They will forget the hours of distress, he said gently. That is not cruelty, Prince Odran. That is relief. Panic thrives on remembering. Zelka's hands trembled. She tried to keep her breathing steady, to keep from shouting, because shouting in the bell chamber was like striking metal in anger, an invitation for the tower to punish. Odran's voice was quiet. You mean they will forget what you did, he said. Varro's smile tightened by a fraction. Your Highness, he said, and a hint of warning entered the honey. This is not the moment for suspicion. The city needs governance. It needs order. Order, Zelka murmured before she could stop herself. Varro's gaze slid to her, cool and appraising. Ah, he said. The bellbinder. Zelka's jaw clenched. She stepped forward, but Odran lifted a hand slightly, a subtle barrier. Not silencing her, timing her. Varro continued, tone mild. You have done impressive work, he said, as if praising a clever dog. But unlicensed interference cannot continue. You've made the spire dependent on a single unauthorized practitioner. That is irresponsible. I've kept it running, Zelka said, voice shaking with controlled fury, while your office stamped papers. Varro's smile returned. And now it has failed, he said, as if stating a regrettable fact. Proof that unauthorized magic is unstable. Zelka's breath hitched. The instinct to argue surged, but the tower's hum under her feet rose, warning. Rage would make her sloppy. Sloppiness would make the bells stop. Odran spoke first. The failure is not hers, he said, voice iron. It is yours. Varro blinked slowly. Excuse me? Odran's gaze was cold sunlight. We found your seal plate bolted into the heart chamber, he said. We found etched riddles designed to appear only under locked noon. We found evidence of a memory tithe siphoning citizens' recollections to fuel an imposed hour. The bell chamber seemed to hold its breath. Even the guards shifted uneasily. Varro's expression didn't change much. That was the most frightening part. Your Highness, he said softly, you are under strain. The tower's distortions can cause confusion. Delusions. It is known. Odran's jaw flexed. And yet, he said, you have already spoken of licensed forgetting as mercy. You have already ordered the witch contained. You do not deny it. Varro's eyes sharpened. I deny wrongdoing, he said. I acted within my jurisdiction to preserve public order. A tithe is lawful. The city benefits from the Regency's projects. The city benefits from remembering its own children, Zelka said, the words breaking from her before she could hold them. Junior is treating time sickness right now. People are losing names, faces, skills. That's not benefit. That's theft. Varro's gaze flicked over her as if she were a smudge on brass. Emotional dramatics, he murmured, then looked back to Odran. Your Highness, you are young. Compassionate. These are admirable traits in a prince, so long as they do not compromise stability. Odran's voice was dangerously calm. Stability without compassion is tyranny, he said. For the first time, Varro's smile faltered. Not fully, he was too practiced, but enough that Zelka saw irritation beneath it, a crack in the polished surface. He turned slightly, addressing the guards as if Odran were no longer the room's son. Prepare the reset, he said. We cannot delay. The longer noon holds, the worse the bleed. One of the guards hesitated, eyes darting to Odran. Varro's voice sharpened. Now. The guard moved toward the bell rope mechanism. Zelka's heart slammed against her ribs. If they cut the bells into silence, the city would lose the last span of memory. People would forget pain, yes, but they would also forget truth. Varro would call it mercy and tighten the Regency's grip while no one remembered why they should resist. No, Zelka breathed, and stepped forward. Odran's arm shot out across her path, not grabbing, not yanking, just barring her with the authority of his body. Stay, he said, low, urgent. If you rush the bell, the tower will clamp. Zelka's throat tightened. Then stop him, she whispered. Odran turned toward Varro. His voice cut through the chamber like a bell strike. Chancellor Varrolask, he said, using the full name like a seal. By solar mandate, I revoke your emergency jurisdiction in this matter effective immediately. Varro's eyes widened a fraction. You cannot. I can, Odran said, and the brightness around him seemed to sharpen, the air tightening. By the same authorization law you love, the solar emissary supersedes local office during civic threat. You will stand down. Varro's face smoothed again into polite disbelief. Your Highness, if you insist on procedure, then I must remind you that public infrastructure requires licensed operators. This bellbinder, Odran corrected, voice icy, is the only person in this city who can hear what the spire is truly doing. Your licenses are ink. Her craft is the difference between a living city and a pliable one. Zelka's breath caught. He said it plainly. In front of guards. In front of Bastion. In front of a chancellor who wanted her erased. Varro's pleasantness snapped, just a little. You are compromising the Regency's authority, he hissed, the first real emotion leaking through. Do you know what you risk? Odran's gaze didn't waver. I know what you are doing, he said. And I refuse. Varro stared at him, then laughed softly, a sound without warmth. Refuse, he echoed. A prince refusing. How charming. He lifted a hand slightly, a gesture too small to be dramatic. The guard at the rope mechanism yanked. The noon bell did not ring. Instead, the entire bell chamber shuddered like an animal struck in a vulnerable place. The lantern flame bent sideways, thinning. A deep, grinding groan rolled up from the engine below. The bell's signatures in Zelka's mind flared, then warped like a song being strangled. The tower was clamping. Zelka's vision blurred at the edges, and for a heartbeat she didn't know whether she was standing or falling. She tasted cinnamon and couldn't place why. She heard laughter twice, her own name spoken in Junior's voice and then overwritten by silence. The bells were trying to stop. Odran's hand found her elbow, steadying her. Zelka, he said close to her ear. Stay. Zelka swallowed hard and forced her mind into the present. Metal. Heat. Vibration. His hand. His voice. The noon's pressure behind her ribs intensified, almost painful. The tower's older resonance, the one that had begun to yearn toward dusk, was panicking now, recoiling from the forced yank at its throat. If it goes silent, Zelka rasped. The city, I know, Odran said, and his voice was raw now under the control. Tell me what to do. Zelka's mind raced. The only way to prevent the clamp was to give the tower an alternative, something it could accept as safety besides silence. That meant retuning the noon bell collar, restoring the proper agreement between bell and engine so the spire could let go of noon without feeling like it was dying. But retuning the noon bell was not a small fix. It was the kind of work that cost a piece of your soul in exchange for a city's breath. Zelka looked at the noon bell, its brass surface gleaming mercilessly. She could feel its collar's pattern, tugged, twisted, fed by solar writ and tithed memory. To undo it, she would have to pour something into the pattern strong enough to anchor the turn into afternoon. A memory seed. Her stomach clenched. The tower would take something precious. Something she couldn't afford to lose. The last clear sound of her mother's lullaby. The feel of her father's hand. The one memory that kept her soft enough to be kind. Zelka's hands shook. Varro watched them with cool interest, as if observing a demonstration. You see, he said lightly, the tower rejects her. It wants order. It wants silence. Mercy. Odran turned his head just enough that Zelka saw his profile in the harsh light, jaw clenched, eyes bright with fury, but also with something else, a terrible, steady resolve. He spoke without looking at Varro. You will not speak of mercy again, he said. Varro smiled thinly. And what will you do, Your Highness? He asked. Arrest me? In your first real crisis? The Solar House will not thank you for scandal. Odran finally looked at him. His gaze was the coldest thing in the room. I will thank myself for a city that remembers, he said. Then he turned back to Zelka. What is the cost? He asked quietly. Zelka's throat tightened. She didn't want to say it aloud. Saying it made it real. Saying it made it something Varro could sneer at. A memory, she whispered. A big one. A seed to anchor the hour turn. Odran's eyes softened by a fraction. Yours? He asked. Zelka nodded, barely. Odran's jaw tightened. No, he said. Zelka blinked, stunned. No. He shook his head once, sharp. Not yours alone, he said. Tell me how to give one. Zelka stared at him. You can't. I have memories, Odran said again, and now it wasn't abstract. It was urgent. Tell me what to do. Zelka's hands trembled harder. The idea of him feeding the tower terrified her. The idea of him losing a piece of himself because of her craft, because of this city, because of Varro's cruelty, she couldn't. You'll regret it, she whispered, voice breaking. You might lose something that makes you you. Odran's gaze held hers with relentless steadiness. If I keep everything that makes me me at the cost of thousands losing what makes them, he said softly, then I am not someone worth being. Zelka's chest tightened so sharply it hurt. She forced herself to look away before the feeling overwhelmed her, before it became something she couldn't carry while the tower was screaming. "Put your hand on the collar," she said, voice shaking. "Not the bell. The collar pattern. And think of a memory you can live without." "No." She swallowed, correcting herself. "Not live without. A memory that matters enough to hold an hour in place." Odran didn't hesitate. He stepped to the noon bell with careful respect, as if approaching a living creature. He set his palm against the brass collar where the etched sigils ran like braided thread. The tower's hum spiked, reacting to his touch. Solar Writ recognized solar blood. Varro's eyes narrowed. "Prince," he began, alarm flickering for the first time. Odran didn't look at him. "Zelka," he said quietly. "Guide me." Zelka stepped close, near enough that her shoulder almost brushed his arm. She did not touch him. She obeyed her own rules, because rules mattered, just not the kind Varro worshipped. She closed her eyes and listened to the collar's warped resonance. It was taut, rigid, screaming with imposed noon. Zelka began to hum, not to command, but to weave. She shaped the resonance around Odran's touch like a loom finding its warp. "Now," she whispered. "Offer it." Odran's breath drew in. Zelka didn't know what memory he chose. She only felt the moment it moved, like a warm stone dropping into deep water. The collar's vibration changed. The bright rigidity faltered. Odran's hand tensed under the collar. His breath hitched. Zelka heard him whisper, so softly it might have been inside his own skull, "I was 12. The tower shuddered. Zelka's hum wavered, then steadied. She didn't ask. She couldn't. The tower was taking what it was offered, and questions were hooks that might catch and tear. Odran's shoulders tightened. His face went very still, as if he were watching something precious burn and refusing to flinch. The bell collar's etched pattern glimmered. For a heartbeat, Zelka saw the sigils not as lines but as agreements, promises carved into metal, sustained by memory. The tower drank. Then the noon bell rang. Not a full peal, no, not yet, but a single, clean note that cut through the chamber like clear water. It vibrated through Zelka's bones. It vibrated through Varro's teeth. It vibrated through the entire spire, down into the city, into every mind that was fighting to hold onto itself. The engine below groaned, not in protest now, but in release. A deep, shifting sigh. Gears changed cadence. Chains loosened a fraction. The harsh noon light in the slats shifted. It was almost imperceptible. A hair of movement. A suggestion that the sun might be willing to lean. Zelka's breath caught. Odran swayed, just slightly, hand still on the collar. His eyes were open but unfocused, as if something inside him had been pulled loose. Zelka reached out instinctively, then stopped herself, remembering her rule, remembering the tower's sensitivity. Instead, she moved closer so her voice could anchor him without touch. "Odran," she whispered. "Stay with me. Name 3 things you can feel." His throat worked. For a heartbeat, Zelka thought he wouldn't be able to answer, that the tower had taken something too large, something that left a blank where a person should be. Then he rasped, "Metal." A pause. "Heat." Another pause, longer. "Your voice." Zelka's chest tightened painfully. "Good," she whispered. "Good. Breathe." Odran drew in a shaky breath. His gaze slowly found hers, and in it, Zelka saw something she hadn't seen before, not just control or duty, but a raw, private vulnerability, as if he'd just handed her proof that he could bleed too. Varro stared at the bell, then at Odran, his pleasant mask cracking into anger. "You have no right," he hissed, voice sharp now. "You are compromising solar integrity." Odran turned his head toward Varro with terrifying calm. "And you," he said, "are compromising the city's soul." Varro's face twisted. "Guards," he snapped. "Seize them. Now." The guards near the stairwell surged forward. The tower reacted instantly. The catwalk shook as gears below shifted. A support beam rotated with a grinding scream, sliding into place like a barricade. One guard stumbled and caught himself, eyes wide. The spire was no longer obeying Varro's command. It was obeying the new agreement forming in its bones. Zelka's heart slammed against her ribs. The tower was choosing. It was choosing to move. But it was still fragile. The clamp could return. The silence could still win if they pushed wrong. We have to finish the sequence, Zelka whispered to Odran, breath shaking. That note was a start. Not the turn. Odran's face was pale under the harsh light, but his gaze steadied again, sharpened by purpose. Tell me, he said. Zelka looked at the noon bell collar, feeling the altered resonance, less rigid, less screaming. A seam had opened. She swallowed, throat tight. Now I have to weave it into the engine, she said. I have to carry that new agreement down the line so the tower believes afternoon is lawful. Varro laughed bitterly. Lawful, he spat. A witch deciding what is lawful. Odran's eyes cut to Varro. No, he said quietly. A city deciding it will not be governed by forgetting. Varro's mouth tightened. He lifted his hand again, and Zelka realized with a jolt that he wasn't signaling guards now. He was signaling the tower. Varro had access. Varro had command phrases. Varro had solar writ. The bell chamber's air tightened. The bell signatures flared again, distorted by an external shove. The lantern flame bent. Varro's voice was low and vicious. If I cannot have it, he murmured, then no one will remember enough to stop me. The tower screamed, not in sound, but in vibration. The engine below lurched. Silence threatened again. Zelka's throat went cold. He's triggering the failsafe, she whispered. Odran's gaze snapped to her. Stop it, he said, and it wasn't a demand, it was desperation. Zelka's mind raced. The only thing that could counter a failsafe command was a stronger agreement, the tower's own promise, reinforced with enough memory to hold against imposed law. She felt, suddenly, the terrible shape of what she had to do. The memory seed had to be doubled. Reinforced. A braid, one memory to open the seam, another to lock it into a new path. Odran had given one. The tower demanded another. Zelka's stomach clenched. She knew what it wanted from her. She could feel it like a hand hovering over the last bright thing she owned. Her mother's lullaby. The sound that had kept Zelka gentle when the world wanted her afraid. Zelka's hands shook. Odran saw it. His gaze sharpened with immediate understanding, horror flashing. No, he said. Zelka swallowed hard. If Varro snaps it shut, the city forgets, she whispered. If the tower goes silent, people lose everything since whenever the failsafe is set. It could be days. Weeks. Odran's jaw clenched. There is another way, he said fiercely. There isn't time, Zelka whispered. Varro's voice rose, chanting something bright and rigid. The bell collar under Odran's hand vibrated violently, the new seam shuddering. The tower was choosing between two truths, imposed law that promised clean forgetting, and living care that promised messy remembering. Zelka stepped closer to the noon bell collar. Her chest ached as if something inside her was already being pulled free. She began to hum again, shaping resonance into a cradle for the memory she was about to sacrifice. Odran grabbed her wrist, forgetting the rule, forgetting the tower, his touch urgent. Zelka, he said, voice rough, look at me. She looked. His eyes were bright with something she couldn't bear. Do not give away the last thing that makes you whole, he whispered. Zelka's throat tightened so hard she could barely breathe. Then tell me how to let a city be wiped clean, she whispered back. Tell me how to listen to Junior's voice crack through a tube and do nothing. Odran's grip trembled on her wrist. For a heartbeat, Zelka felt the weight of him, how much he'd already given, how much he was still willing to give, how rigid he had been and how fiercely he was changing. He released her wrist slowly, like letting go of something he wanted to keep safe and couldn't. His voice was low, raw. If you do this, he whispered, I will remember it for you. Zelka's breath caught. The words weren't poetry. They were a vow forged in panic and tenderness and the harsh truth of noon. Varro's chant sharpened. The tower's vibration spiked. Zelka closed her eyes. She reached inward, past fear, past anger, past the hollow edges where the tower had already taken pieces of her. She found the lullaby, her mother's voice, low and warm, singing against winter wind, telling Zelka that clocks were only frightening if you forgot they needed kindness. Zelka's hum wove around it like thread around a candle flame. Then she offered it. The memory surged up, bright and heartbreaking. The tower drank. For a heartbeat, Zelka felt her mother's voice in perfect clarity, every note, every breath, every gentle pause. Then it began to blur. The melody slipped first, like a ribbon sliding through fingers. The warmth remained, but the words were their words. The cadence faded, becoming an empty shape. Zelka's throat made a sound she refused to name. Her knees weakened. Odran's arm caught her fully, this time, no rule, no caution, because if she fell into the machinery, the tower wouldn't care why. He held her against his chest, steady and solid, and Zelka hated the tower for forcing this moment out of her and loved Odran for not letting it kill her. The noon bell rang again. This time, it rang in sequence, not alone, but with the answering resonance of the next bell down the line, then the next, a chain of agreement rippling through the engine. The groaning below shifted into a new cadence, less tight, less screaming. The light in the slats moved. Not much, but enough. A shadow, an actual shadow, began to stretch along the brass floor. Dusk was not here, but the world was leaning toward it. Varro's chant broke into a snarl. "Stop," he hissed, stepping forward. "Stop it." Odran lifted his head, eyes blazing now. "By solar mandate," he said, voice carrying like a bell strike, "I place Chancellor Varro Lask under arrest for treason against civic continuity." Varro froze, then laughed, ugly now. "You think you can arrest me inside a tower that barely obeys itself?" Odran's gaze was merciless. "I think you have mistaken law for a weapon you alone can wield," he said. "You are wrong." The guards hesitated, caught between two suns. The tower vibrated, choosing the one whose authority now carried compassion instead of theft. Zelka's breath came in shallow gasps, head spinning with the hollow ache of loss. She clung to the present by clinging to Odran's heartbeat under her ear, to the vibration of the bell sequence shifting, to the lengthening shadow on the brass. "Odran," she whispered, voice broken. "Don't let it go silent." Odran's arm tightened around her, and his voice, when he spoke, was low and steady against her hair. "It won't," he murmured. "I won't." Outside, the sun, stubborn, reluctant, finally began to move. It was slow, almost insulting in its slowness after the brutality of being trapped at zenith. But it moved. And in the bell chamber, for the first time since the locks engaged, the spire's hum sounded less like a scream and more like a breath taken after surviving a choke. The crisis was not over. Varro was still there, with teeth and lies and desperate power. Zelka was hollow in a place she hadn't been hollow before. But the tower had heard them. And the hour had begun, at last, to turn. The first real sign that the world was changing wasn't the sun's slow tilt. It was sound. Not the harsh, solitary note that had cracked noon open, but the city's own noise shifting into a different texture, less brittle, less frantic. Zelka felt it through the spire's bones like ripples traveling down a chain, a distant cry that did not repeat itself, a cartwheel that hit a cobble once instead of twice, a laugh that rose and faded without snapping back to the beginning. Time was remembering how to move. Zelka's breath came in shallow pulls against Odran's chest. His arms were still around her, firm and steady, his heartbeat a stubborn drum insisting on one moment, one now. The bell sequence overhead continued in an uneven cadence as the engine fought to accept the new agreement. The tower was breathing, but it was not yet calm. Varro stood on the catwalk with his pleasant mask in pieces. The Chancellor's eyes were sharp with calculation, his mouth a thin line that tried and failed to curl into a smile. "You think you've won," he said, voice low enough to feel like a secret, loud enough to carry. "But you've only made the cost visible. People hate visible costs. They prefer their suffering tidy, stamped, forgettable." Odran lifted his head slowly. The lantern light and the noon glare both caught the gold thread at his collar. It did not look like glory now. It looked like something he had decided to use differently. "I have no interest in tidy suffering," Odran said. His voice was calm, and that calm was more dangerous than shouting. "I am interested in consent." Varro's nostrils flared. "Consent is chaos," he snapped, and the word sounded too much like the etched taunts. "Without authorized control, this city will rip itself apart." Zelka forced herself upright in Odran's hold. Her head swam with the hollow ache where the lullaby had been, A warmth without melody, a cradle with no voice. She swallowed hard, dragging her mind back to the present by sheer will. Vaskandel has held together because people here choose each other, she rasped. Her voice sounded rougher than she expected, as if the tower had taken more than music. Not because you siphoned their minds to fuel your projects. Varro's gaze flicked to her, cold contempt settling back into place. A witch speaking of choice, he murmured. When your very existence is unauthorized. Odran's eyes sharpened. Enough, he said quietly. The guards shifted, uncertain again. They were trained to obey seals and titles and procedures, and the chamber held too many of those at once. Varro's authority was familiar. Odran's was absolute. Zelka's was unsettling, because it was real. Odran turned slightly, addressing the guards without raising his voice. You heard the Chancellor order a reset, he said. You saw the tower clamp when he forced the rope. You heard his own words about forgetting as mercy. One guard swallowed, eyes darting between Varro and Odran. Another's jaw worked as if he'd bitten down on doubt. Odran continued, voice steady as gears. If the bells went silent, the city would lose memory. That is not maintenance. That is assault on civic continuity. Under Solar Mandate, that is treason. Varro barked a bitter laugh. You will accuse me of treason because I attempted to preserve public order. Your Highness, you are. Because you attempted to weaponize forgetting, Odran cut in, and the edge in his voice could have sliced brass. Because you bolted your seal plate into the spire's heart and called it stability. Varro's eyes narrowed. You have no proof, he hissed. Zelka's mouth went dry. Proof. She pictured Merrow's frantic notes, Junior's cracked voice. She pictured Silas scrambling down through the tower ribs with confession on his tongue. She pictured the heart chamber's etched revelation. We do, Zelka whispered, and hated how small her voice sounded in this enormous chamber. Odran's gaze flicked to her, brief, steady, anchoring, and then he nodded, as if accepting a hand offered across a gap. Archivist Merrow is recording the city's stutters and losses, Odran said. Bellward medic Junior Thorne is treating time sickness. Silas Penth has confessed to carving riddles under your instruction. Varro's expression flickered for the first time with something like genuine alarm. Silas is a frightened animal, he snapped. He will say anything. Odran's voice didn't change. And the tower itself is proof, he said. The seal plate is still in its heart, loosening. The etched lines under it read tithe and remembering. Those words are carved into brass, Chancellor. They do not forget. Varro's gaze darted toward the bell chamber exit, toward his guards, toward any route that might still be his. Zelka felt the spire's vibration sharpen in response, as if sensing his intent to flee. The tower did not like thieves. Varro took a single step backward. The catwalk trembled. A support brace rotated with a grinding shriek, sliding into place behind him like a closing jaw. Varro froze, eyes widening. For the first time, his confidence cracked into something uglier than anger. Fear. The tower is malfunctioning, he snarled, forcing his voice back into control. It is unsafe. This is exactly why. This is exactly why your kind should not touch it, Zelka whispered, and the words were meant for herself as much as for him. Her hands shook. Her head felt full of white noise where her mother's voice used to be. The loss pressed at her ribs like a bruise. Odran's hand found her shoulder lightly, a brief touch that steadied without claiming. Zelka didn't pull away this time. She didn't have the strength, and she didn't want to. Varro's gaze snapped to that touch, and contempt flared. So this is it, he hissed. The noon prince compromised by sentiment. By a witch. Odran's eyes turned to Varro, cold as winter metal. By a citizen, he corrected. By the person who has kept your stamped city alive while you stole from it. The guard nearest Varro shifted again, and this time his movement was not uncertainty. It was decision. He stepped forward and reached for Varro's arm. Varro jerked back. Do you know who I am? He snapped. Yes, the guard said, voice tight. I do. His hand closed around Varro's sleeve. Varro's composure shattered. He twisted, trying to wrench free, and his other hand darted toward the bell rope mechanism as if he could still force one last silence. Zelka's breath caught. The tower's hum spiked, panicked at the memory of being yanked. Odran moved faster than Zelka had seen him move at any point in the tower. He stepped between Varro and the rope with controlled violence, no wild strike, no loss of balance, and seized Varro's wrist. Not to hurt. To stop. Varro snarled, struggling. You can't. I can, Odran said, voice low and lethal. And you will not touch the bells again. For a heartbeat, Varro's eyes met Odran's, and Zelka saw it. Varro, realizing the prince he'd assumed would bend, had become something unmanageable. Not reckless. Not rebellious for spectacle. Simply unwilling to sacrifice people for convenience. Varro's struggle faltered. The guards moved in, taking him firmly, binding his hands with a strip of chain. Varro's face twisted with rage and humiliation. He tried to speak, to spin words into law, but the tower's vibration seemed to swallow his voice, as if the spire itself had grown tired of hearing him. When Varro was dragged toward the stairwell, the catwalk braces shifted away just enough to allow passage, like a throat opening to expel poison. Then they slid back into place. The bell chamber held its breath again, but it was a different kind of tension now. Less panic. More caution. Like a wounded creature watching to see whether the danger had truly left. Zelka sagged against the railing, knees weak. The world tilted. Her mind reached for the lullaby out of habit and found only a soft, blank warmth where it had been. She swallowed hard. It's gone, she whispered. Odran turned immediately, eyes searching her face. What is? He asked, though he already knew. My mother's song, Zelka said. Her voice broke on the word mother, and she hated that it did. She pressed her palm against the cool brass as if the cold could hold her together. I can't hear it. Odran's expression tightened with something like grief. He stepped close, not crowding her, simply bringing his steadiness into her space like an anchor dropped in deep water. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Zelka's laugh was raw. Don't, she whispered. Don't say sorry like it was an accident. I chose it. You chose the city, Odran said. Zelka's throat tightened. I chose the city because I didn't have another choice, she whispered. Because the tower would have eaten everything else if I didn't feed it something it could hold. Odran's gaze stayed on hers, unwavering, and in it Zelka saw not pity but recognition, someone who understood the shape of sacrifice, because he had made one too. What did it take from you? Zelka asked before she could stop herself. Odran's jaw flexed. His eyes flicked away for the first time since he'd turned toward her. A small, involuntary movement, like someone protecting a tender wound from air. I don't know, he admitted, voice rougher than usual. I offered a memory. I can feel the space where it was. Zelka's chest ached. Can you remember what it was about? Odran frowned slightly, as if concentrating hard on a word that refused to come. I said I was 12, he murmured. I know that. I know I was, in a room with sunlit tiles. I know someone spoke a rule to me. And his throat worked. I think I questioned it. Zelka's eyes burned. And now you can't. Odran shook his head once, almost angry at himself. It's like trying to grab smoke, he said. I can't catch it. Zelka closed her eyes, breathing through the ache. 2 sacrifices braided into brass, 1 song and 1 doubt. 2 people altered so a city could remain itself. The bells above them continued their slow, imperfect sequence, the engine still settling into the new agreement. Zelka forced herself to focus on the work, because work was safer than grief. It's not finished, she whispered. Odran nodded. Tell me what remains, he said. Zelka turned toward the noon bell collar. The sigils there were still warm with new resonance, less rigid now, threaded with the memory seed they'd offered. But the sequence had to be carried down into the engine, or the tower might relapse into panic and clamp again. We have to go back down, Zelka said. Not all the way to the heart. The mid-core junction. The flywheels. We need to spread the new agreement so the engine believes it belongs to itself, not to us. Odran's gaze sharpened. Can you do it alone? Zelka's mouth went dry. She could. But alone meant paying more, risking hollowness, risking collapse. Alone meant being the tower's sole tether again. No, she admitted. Odran's expression softened by a fraction. Then I remain, he said. Zelka stared at him. Your guards, your office, Varro. They can wait, Odran said, and the firmness in his voice was not arrogance now but priority. The city's hours are still unstable. You are not going down into the engine alone. Zelka's throat tightened. She wanted to argue. She wanted to insist she didn't need him, because needing him felt like a vulnerability too large to carry. But the blank warmth in her chest where her mother's voice had been made it harder to pretend she was untouched. All right, she whispered. They moved again, descending through corridors that now felt slightly less hostile, as if the tower had recognized the new agreement and was willing to cooperate, begrudgingly rather than punish. The gear ring in the ladder shaft aligned more readily. The rotating bridges shifted slower, giving them time. In the mid-core, the flywheels hummed with a different cadence, smoother, less shrill. Zelka pressed her palm to the rim and listened. The wrong resonance was still there, but it no longer dominated. It was being absorbed, diluted, persuaded into alignment with the tower's older rhythm. She began to hum, softer now, weaving the noon bell's new agreement into the flywheel's pattern. She traced sigils with her fingertip, not carving, not forcing, refreshing what already belonged. Odran stood close enough to steady her if she swayed, and sometimes, when her breath shook, he spoke quietly. Metal, he would say. Heat. Vibration. And Zelka would answer, sometimes through clenched teeth, your voice. They worked until the engine's roar settled into a steady, familiar churn. At last, Zelka felt it, the moment the tower accepted the sequence as its own, not as an intrusion. The older resonance surged, not violently, but like a river regaining its channel. Above them, the bells rang one by one, cleaner now. The tower's locks released. Not all at once, but in a deliberate cascade, clank, 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 like a throat unclenching. Zelka's knees nearly gave out with relief. She pressed her forehead to the cool brass and let herself breathe. Odran's hand hovered near her shoulder, then settled there lightly. A touch so careful it felt like asking permission. Zelka didn't pull away. They made their way down to the speaking tube chamber, because Zelka needed to hear Junior's voice again, needed to know the city still held. She seized the tube labeled Bellwood Medic and spoke, voice hoarse. Junior. It's shifting. We're restoring the sequence. Our people, are they still themselves? Static hissed. Then Junior's voice came through, rough with exhaustion and relief. Zel, she said. Zel, thank the hours. The shadows, she laughed once, shaky. The shadows are moving. People are crying, laughing. Both. It's a mess. Zelka closed her eyes, relief so sharp it hurt. Keep them together, she whispered. Tell them to hold on to each other until evening. Junior's voice softened. We are, she said. Then, sharper, and I've got Silas Penth coughing his conscience into a cup of water for me. He told Merra everything. Merra's writing like her hands on fire. Zelka exhaled. Good, she murmured. Don't let the truth bleed away. You won't, Junior said, and Zelka could hear her smile through the distortion. You're stubborn enough to nail it to the tower. Zelka's throat tightened. Junior, she whispered, then hesitated, ashamed of the smallness of what she needed. If you still have a spare moment, could you? I know, Junior interrupted softly. You sound like you lost something. Zelka swallowed hard. Yes, she whispered. Junior's voice was quiet now, fierce in its tenderness. Come down when you can, she said. I'll make you tea. And if you forgot how your mother's song goes, we'll make a new one. Stubbornly. Zelka pressed her forehead to the brass tube, breath shaking. Thank you, she whispered. Junior snorted, as if gratitude was unnecessary. Go finish saving the city, she said. And don't let that prince throw himself into martyrdom. He looks like the type. Zelka's breath hitched into a laugh that was half a sob. I'll try, she whispered. The line hissed and faded. Zelka turned slowly and found Odran watching her. His expression was controlled, but his eyes were tired, the kind of tired that came from carrying more than sleep loss. He looked like a man who had handed part of himself to a tower and would never quite be the same. Varro? Zelka asked. Contained, Odran said. Escorted to the city hall for holding. Merrow's records and Silas's confession will be secured under solar seal. Zelka flinched at the word seal, then forced herself to breathe. A seal could be a weapon. It could also be a shield, if held by someone who understood what it protected. And the memory tithe? She asked quietly. Odran's jaw tightened. It ends here, he said. Not quietly. Not buried. Publicly. Zelka studied his face. They'll fight you, she whispered. Your own people. Odran's gaze held hers. Then they will learn, he said, and there was no arrogance in it, only resolve. I have been obedient. I have been useful. I have been bright and rigid because I believed rigidity was safety. I was wrong. Zelka's throat tightened. The words felt like someone breaking a chain from the inside. They climbed out of the spire together as the last locks released. The city greeted them with a sound like a collective inhale. People stood in the streets, blinking up at the sky as if they'd forgotten what movement looked like. Some clutched each other's hands. Some pressed palms to their own temples as if checking their minds were still there. Somewhere, someone began to weep openly, and it did not repeat. Shadows stretched long for the first time in what felt like forever, sliding across cobbles and climbing walls like shy creatures returning home. Zelka stepped onto the bridge over the canal and froze. The sun was lowering. Not fast. Not dramatically. But undeniably, beautifully lowering, the light turning warm instead of merciless. The river caught it and broke it into gold. Vaskandel was about to see sunset. Zelka's breath caught hard. The blank warmth in her chest swelled, and for a split second she reached for her mother's lullaby to meet this moment the way she always had, music rising to match beauty. There was nothing. Her throat tightened, grief sharp and sudden. Odran stepped beside her, close enough that their sleeves almost brushed. He didn't touch her. He didn't assume. He simply stood where she could feel his presence if she needed it. Zelka stared at the horizon. It's so quiet, she whispered. Odran followed her gaze. The first true evening after a long noon would feel like that, he said. Zelka swallowed. I don't have her song anymore, she said, and the admission hurt like tearing cloth. Odran's voice was low. I can't remember what I gave, he confessed, as if meeting her truth with his own. Only that it mattered. Zelka turned her head and looked at him fully for the first time without the tower between them. In the open air, he looked less like a symbol and more like a person who had been forced to choose, and who had chosen with his whole body. You could have walked away, Zelka whispered. You could have let Varro reset it and called it mercy. Odran's jaw tightened. And then I would have lived in a world where I knew what I was, even if I couldn't name it, he said. His eyes held hers, steady. I would rather be unsure and honest than certain and cruel. The sun kissed the riverline, and the sky began to bruise into colors Zelka hadn't realized she missed: amber melting into rose, then into a deepening violet at the edges. People around them gasped as if the sight itself was an anchor. Zelka's eyes burned. Odran's voice softened by a fraction. Zelka, he said, and the way he said her name felt like placing it carefully where it could not be stolen. She looked at him. I came to take the tower, he said quietly, to correct an unauthorized problem. And then I watched you pay for strangers with parts of yourself. I watched you keep the city alive while the law measured your worth in stamps. His throat worked, and for a moment the control slipped just enough to reveal something tender and fierce beneath it. I do not want to be the kind of man who calls that unauthorized. Zelka's breath shook. And I don't want to be the kind of woman who only trusts herself, she whispered, surprised by her own honesty. But she swallowed. I've had reasons. Odran's gaze didn't waver. I know, he said. The last edge of the sun slipped behind the horizon. For a heartbeat, the world held still, not trapped, not clamped, but reverent. The bell sequence behind them rang in clean order, and this time it sounded like celebration rather than warning. Vaskandel's first true sunset after endless noon painted the river and rooftops in fire. Zelka's chest ached with grief and relief tangled together. She felt hollow where the lullaby had been, But she also felt something new threading through that hollow space: presence. Choice. The knowledge that she had not been alone inside the gears when it mattered. Odran turned slightly toward her, not crowding, not claiming. "What do you want now?" he asked, voice low. "Not what the tower requires. Not what the Regency demands. What you want." Zelka stared at him. No one had asked her that in years. People asked what she could do, what she could fix, what she could pay. Not what she wanted. Her throat tightened. She thought of the spire, its gears, its promises, its hunger. She thought of training apprentices so the tower wouldn't live on one person's memory debt. She thought of Junior's tea and Merrow's ink and Bastion's gruff pride. She thought of a prince who had offered up a piece of himself without asking for ownership in return. "I want the tower to belong to the city," Zelka said softly. "Not to a chancellor. Not to a single witch. To the city." Odran nodded. "It will," he said. "And I want," Zelka continued, voice trembling, "to sleep one night without listening for the bells like they're a knife at my throat." Odran's eyes softened. "You will," he said. Zelka's fingers curled around the bridge railing. The metal was cool under her palm, steady. "And I want," she hesitated, because wanting this felt like stepping off a ledge. "I want to choose my life without being timed by fear." Odran's breath caught, just slightly. "Then choose," he whispered. Zelka looked at him, and the air between them felt charged with everything they hadn't said in the tower, every steadying hand, every shared breath, every moment of trust built in crisis. She didn't reach for his hand right away. She didn't rush. She let the choice be clean. Then she lifted her fingers and touched his sleeve, just above his wrist, a small contact that asked rather than took. Odran looked down at her touch, then back up at her face. He didn't move until he saw her nod, tiny, almost imperceptible. Only then did he turn his hand and take hers. His palm was warm. His grip was steady. Not tight. Not possessive. Simply present, as if he were offering an anchor and letting her decide whether to use it. Zelka's throat tightened, and she exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle into her memory with deliberate care. Behind them, the Aurelian Spire's bells rang on, keeping time not as a threat, but as a promise renewed. And in the deepening dusk, with the city finally moving forward again, they stood side by side and chose a future that wasn't timed by anyone but them.